Everyone's a janitor with and you've got all these keys, all the different energies you can try, and you have your own locks. Let's say they're all lined up on your midsection here, and you're trying to jam them in there and try to figure out how to open up things as best you possibly can. But your lock and your combination of those locks is going to vary depending on who you are, who your parents were.
Right. So are you not? Wait. Let me interject real quick. Are you now saying that we can only get the answers through self-experimentation? Welcome to Vigorous Podcast. Today, I'm joined with the smartest man in bodybuilding, the only bodybuilder I can still learn stuff from. Welcome to the show, Dr. Scott Stevenson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Browse YouTube more because I can't be the only one. There's some people out there.
There's a lot of smart guys, of course, in bodybuilding. But I mean, since the early days, since professional muscle and intense muscle, everybody has labeled you as the smartest man in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us will still go to you for questions and get inspired to do more research. Because I've been following you since, man, you of course you did it with Scott McNally, and you're on the Mountain Dog website. You have several articles there, and every time I read something or listen to you, I have to pause the video and go to PubMed and Wikipedia and Science Direct and Google Scholar and just catch up on new material, because I'm like, wait a minute, there's so much more to what you're saying, right? And I know you try to dumb it down, but I always like to, learn more about it. So every time I listen to you, the podcast, a 1 hour podcast will take like 2 hours, 4 hours just to do additional research in the meantime.
I mean, I think I'm maybe the most curious man in bodybuilding. At least I have been.
That's for sure. Yeah,
there's just rabbit holes galore. People say, he's forgotten more than you ever knew. I've forgotten a lot.
Yeah,
because I just can't keep all the information in my head.
You can't retain it all. Can't retain it all. And usually, like a guy like you and me, we go down the rabbit hole and then we turn it into a YouTube video, like you did with the carnitine subject and the carnitine articles that you produced. And then, of course, you go so deep into it. But then later on, you switch yourself to a new subject, and then you kind of forget about the previous one, and you dive down the rabbit hole again.
The thing that I notice now, because I'm not in academia, and I don't have anyone, I can talk with, of course, my clients who I do consultations with about these things, and that keeps the information fresh. But I don't have, this is kind of what you're getting at, I don't have anyone to challenge me on a regular basis, or someone with whom to explain. I don't have anyone that's mentoring me actively, so I am my own mentor, right? And that's part of the reason, if I were in academia, and I love this, like when I was doing my master's degree, especially in my PhD, I would just migrate amongst all the different labs with all the real geniuses, the really, really smart guys. I mean, guys, there were people there that I ran into. It's like they weren't idiot savants, but their capacity there was one guy who's named Art Castle. He was kind of a molecular biologist, exercise biologist, physiologist. You could ask Art any question. This was the perception, and he knew the answer to everything. It was, he never missed a beat. So
it's amazing that a lot of these guys are so knowledgeable, but they're not really on social media. They're just doing their field that they chose. And then they're literally gold mines of information. Then of course you have to, be in the luxurious position that you actually get to meet them and ask them questions. It's, I think the smarter you get, the less of those people are actually around you.
Less on social media.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because most of these guys are just doing their thing with in a medical field or performing the actual studies or drug designing new stuff. But you actually have 7 studies published.
Do I have that many? I haven't.
I went to PubMed.
Yeah, there's a few. There's a few things. Yeah, mainly from my graduate school days. But yeah,
right. But recently, you published one about peak week recommendations for bodybuilders and evidence-based approach.
Yes.
And this is now, I mean, how many people are using this study to actually start peaking for their competition, or also help to peak their athletes? I mean, I get these questions all the time. What do you think about this article? I said, it's one of the best articles you will ever read when it comes to peak week.
Guillermo Escalante, who headed up that whole study, that whole article, just brought me in sort of at the last minute. Someone else couldn't fulfill their role. They brought me in. I'm like, this is awesome. This has been my wheelhouse for so long. It's just such a cool topic, and it's so intricate. And I, without getting into too many details, one of the things that I wanted to kind of put in that article, and there's also a certification out there now for what they call them, physique specialists or something like that, bodybuilding physique specialists. And the thing that's so tough is that everyone wants to use diuretics. Diuretics are the big thing that just everyone just throws in there, and they're absolutely not necessary unless you're someone who has impaired kidney function for some reason or another. And I've had a few people that couldn't respond to normal water and sodium manipulation. One guy was taking like 2 grams of caffeine a day just to stay alive. He was getting up and personal training from like 4 a.m. to like 8 at night.
And then doing prep at the same time.
And then he was dieting down, right? So then he came to me like 4 weeks out. It's like, okay, I'm like, what's your cat? And I thought it was a typo. I thought maybe he missed a decimal point somewhere in there or something. But it was like 2 grams. So he didn't respond. People that have been prescribed like Lasix for high blood pressure, I've seen that before. Their kidneys are kind of shot. But anyway, that was such a nice thing to be able to put out there to see. So many people could see that you don't need pharmaceuticals to do a peak week. And if you need to manipulate water, hopefully you're in good enough shape that you don't have to do anything as far as that goes. But it can be done really effectively with numerous strategies.
All you need to do is bring 2 bricks, and put them under the foot end of your bed, so you can sleep at a sloped angle and bring all that water down. I did this with my wife and one of my drug-free clients for many years because we couldn't use diuretics because they were competing in drug-tested federations. So all you can do is maybe a little bit of caffeine and of course sleeping at a slope. But I would usually put their legs on pillows, and so that's why I like this article so much, because it kind of confirmed what I was doing for a while. Like, wait a minute, this actually has scientific evidence now.
And it's just for people who are wondering, it's not just legs on the pillows. You have to have the whole body on the decline. So you get the increased venous return to the heart and get the atrial natriuretic peptide released. Somebody will put the legs up, and that's good. Then you won't have water that'll settle in your legs.
Right.
But to get the whole body diuretic effect, or natriuretic effect and diuretic effect, you have to do that. And and that's just we don't need to go into that here because it's kind of our purpose, but that was just kind of cool how I pieced that together from NASA research, looking at space flight.
That's where you got it from, right? From space flight.
That's where I stole it from. It causes diuretic effect, and they were trying to mimic people in space where you don't have the gravity, you don't have the hydrostatic pressure pulling your water down, so you put people inverted in their bed, 6 degrees matched what they saw in terms of plasma volume loss in astronauts. So like, okay, so we can probably use this and maybe do a little bit more if needed and get a diuretic. And it works for at least 2 or 3 pounds on most people.
No, it's very effective. It's very effective. So every time, on YouTube, you have all these professional bodybuilders, they do pre-contest footage, right? They make a YouTube video about it. And I'm sure they're shoving all the stones underneath the bed so they can hide the secret of what's really going on. Yeah. You're literally saving kidneys this way, because the over-diuretic, especially in the 90s and 2000s, I mean, people would use anything as a diuretic, including those mercury-based diuretic drinks that Chad Nichols supposedly had. Destroyed a lot of kidneys in the 90s and 2000s with the diuretic testing. So I wish those guys knew about this back then.
Yeah. Some of this stuff wasn't done. The research really hadn't been done until like the 90s. I learned about this from a guy named Victor Convertino. He worked for NASA. He was he did a lot of this stuff, and a brilliant guy came and did a guest lecture when I was in grad school. I'm like, oh, this is really cool stuff. There's just so much there. Right. I wonder, too, the thing that's maybe is the issue, and you've seen this probably with your client, the big deal with diuretics, is I suspect there's some short-term, maybe somewhat long-term damage that happens to the kidneys when someone starts with, they start taking their diuretics a week out, the 7 to 10 day out old school protocol. After that, you're not going to respond to these sorts of things. You're pretty much stuck going the pharmaceutical route, right?
I think that there's a permanent adaptation process if you really crush your or manipulate your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system with aldactone for a week and then flush everything out with Lasix or hydrochlorothiazide and triamterene.
I think there's something that is, it can last for weeks at least.
Now there's some overcompensation afterwards.
Some desensitization. Something like that. You can't, for instance, do a practice run even 2 weeks out with diuretics and then expect it to work the same way. And guys who try to do several shows in a row, like that's why it's such a crazy feat, or has been for so long, to do multiple shows like every weekend. because the diuretic strategy that where people were employing had to be totally different. It was based, and this is not a knock on Chris Aceto, but Chris Aceto's job is to look. He literally has this, intuition about what's going to work, and he sees this visually, and he picks up on things maybe he can't even put into words. But you have to sort of go with the flow, and that's what happens. What people use, how many of what the diazide, aldactone, whatever it is they're using varies so much week by week. Whereas the way I do peak week, it's all in that article, it's in my book, etc. You can do it every week. You could. I had one buddy of mine who started competing in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. It's actually going to do an over 60 Mr. Universe here probably next year.
Wow.
And the way he does, the way I do the peak week, you make a little bit of a step forward in terms of conditioning too. So you don't lose out on your diet. It's not like you missed a week of dieting because you did a peak week practice.
Right.
You think I did it like 7 or 8 times in the span of 10 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Because he was ready early and he wanted to practice that and fine tune it. And he was just kept on, it didn't bring him back. So then he could eat really, really well. He kept on sort of deloading repeatedly as you dieted in. And with him, one of the things is that he was so stressful doing the peak week as it can be. It's like everything's coming down to this. If I mess this up, so once it's kind of like preparing for a speech, right? I still get nervous before I have to give a talk.
Right. Well, if you do it over and over again, then it's just natural. And then after a while, all the guessing work is out of it. Yeah. And you know that it's going to work. Yeah, that saves a lot. I would used to do it with my athletes as well. Just practice many, many times until it's perfect. But then not use diuretics because, of course, the diuretics will, the overcompensation, and you lose performance for a couple of days afterwards. So this is the reason why all these athletes are so tired and exhausted, excluding the vasodilators. I mean, that makes you tired and exhausted also. Right. The adenosine monophosphate injections. That makes you very, very, wipes you out. So for the guys that, use diuretics to practice their peaking protocol, like a couple days later, if they start going heavy into the gym again, it's quite risky to get muscle tears or just other kinds of small injuries, and that will sit you back. I've seen it happen with a couple of guys that wanted to practice their peak a month out, and it works with using diuretics, just a small amount, 3 days of aldactone and maybe half a diazide, and then Monday they're in the gym doing chest, and they get injured.
Yeah, because are these guys that have a lot more water? They have sort of rebound water wise, and now their chest is fuller. And
they're just so depleted from the water, right? Yeah. And the sodium electrolyte imbalance is there, and then they want to train at the heavy compounds because they're already adding in the Superdrol and all that stuff. So they think they're strong, but the muscle is like dehydrated and structurally impaired. Yeah, and that's when they start injuring themselves. So So I really like this approach that you documented in that article. And I think a lot of kidneys are saved this way.
Though it can go away. What you said both ways. You can have someone, I think, who's got an electrolyte imbalance, and then maybe they have their training and get a little bit of a spasm, so to speak, during, and that's what causes a muscle pull. But also, some guys go in and they're just full as a house, right? Yeah, and they go down to do a leg press, let's say, and they can only go down 2/3 as far as they normally could because their legs are so full and pumped. Exactly. And it feels great, right? You look awesome because you're still lean. The vascularity is out of control, but that's when a lot of times people get muscle tears as well. Yeah. Because there's just so much stress on the connective tissue. Yeah.
Right. So today I wanted to get you on to talk about all the anabolic pathways. The androgen receptor, all of them. The estrogen receptor, all of them. Well, we'll probably get to a few of them. So that's all the more reason for a part 2 if people like what we have to say. I remember a couple of years ago, I heard you talk about the sexual hormone binding globulin receptor. And I never heard about this.
The Megalin receptor,
Yeah, the Megalin receptor, right. So a lot of people misconstrue that SHBG has to be low for your testosterone to become free, and thus they hammer the proviron or the DHT derivatives. They crush the sexual hormone binding globulin into the single digits, and then they stop making progress. So maybe we can start there, because the androgen receptor will take, there's so many androgens, so many polymorphisms to discuss. So maybe we can start with the sexual hormone binding globulin receptor complex. I think I was one of the first to really, dive into it deeply on YouTube, but it's being inspired by you because you were one of the first to talk about it, because I never heard about it until I heard you talk about it on a podcast. And then, of course, I had to pause it and do more research.
Right. So what was your take on the free hormone hypothesis? That's the idea that, more free testosterone is better. It's only the free that can enter the cell, right? Diffuse lipophilically through the cell membrane.
Exactly. So it can permeate into the cell membrane and then attach to the androgen receptor in the cytoplasm and then transfer into the nucleus, right? Where it can bind to several other cofactors and then start transcribing DNA. But what I realized is that, of course, activating the estradiol receptor or the estrogen receptor can also activate the androgen receptor. And if you the sexual bonding globulin, if it attaches to the receptor complex on the cell membrane, and then an androgen goes in, whether that's testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, or some of the derivatives, it increases cyclic adenosine monophosphate concentrations in the cytoplasm. And this can also help with androgen-mediated gene transcription. So this is how I always saw it. And the funny thing is, if you go down the literature, in the beginning they say SHBG binds up androgens, end of story. And then a couple of years later, SHBG binds up androgens and might deliver it to tissue through the SHBG receptor complex, right? So now you see it not as something that holds the testosterone hostage, but now something as it can deliver, like albumin, for example. But it binds strongly to the SHBG and weakly to albumin. All right, so that's phase 2. And then phase 3 was when the SHBG is bound to the receptor complex, testosterone can't enter, right? So it's just useless. And then later on, when SHBG is bound to the receptor complex, testosterone can enter and thus increases cyclic adenosine monophosphate concentrations, which has an effect on the androgen receptor. So it's so funny when you look at the literature, the closer you get to our timeline, the more interesting it gets. But even if you start looking now, I mean, I think the most recent study is already several years old. So extrapolating with the limited... extrapolating with the limited data that we have. I mean, I always just told people, keep your SHBG 15, 20, 25 nanomoles per liter if possible. And in this context, you see that anabolism is better, libido is better, well-being is better. So at least for the guys that have single-digit SHBG, because they overdo the proviron or they're on a boatload of DHT derivatives, I feel that at one point they get stuck making progress. And even though their androgen index is sky high, right, because everything is now free, their aggression index also sky high.
The asshole index is sky high.
Yeah, the asshole index. Yeah.
That's the interesting thing. Like a standard way, your listeners, I think, are very well educated, especially from you, but just in general, you're going to get people kind of like I do. People are very curious about this sort of thing, so they like to listen to the sciencey stuff. But when they do knockout, for instance, that's just a blunt way to test the impact of particular hormone or whatever, just knock out the gene for the receptor. And when they knock out the Megalin receptor, they knock out the androgen receptor, they see different defects, right? So especially for like sexual organ development, the Megalin receptor, the SHBG complex receptor, as you were calling it, is important. It has differential effects. And, and it could be that in the developed individual or someone who's already past sexual maturity, exactly what you're talking about, it makes sense, is that having enough SHBG bound to the androgen, bind to the Megalin receptor, is important for sexual well-being in the brain, right? So the thing that I don't know, that I wonder, and I haven't, maybe you found this, is can SHBG bound to an androgen, let's say, make its way across the blood-brain barrier?
That I'm not sure.
There are Megalin receptors on nervous tissue. That much I know has been found. But I don't know if it makes its way in the brain. But there's certainly something in what you're saying as far as having SHB that's not like in the gutter, right?
No, and it's so weird. Like if the receptor complex is present on many tissues, but the studies don't really differentiate which tissues this actually happens, where the cyclic adenosine monophosphate increases. And this makes it so hard. So there's a lot of extrapolation and bro science involved with just self-experimentation. And then you see what happens when SHBG is low, right, in serum. And then you bring that up with a selective estrogen receptor modulator or thyroid medications, or you bring the insulin and the growth hormone and the androgens down a little bit to bring that up. And in many cases, some of the issues that most people experience regarding libido and also getting stuck making progress, it kind of resolve themselves. And I think it's also, SHBG is also one of the reasons why when you take such a long time off steroids, like I am now, and we can take Chase Irons as an example. Have you been following along what Chase Irons has been doing?
I haven't. Everything I've been doing has been in German for like the last year and a half. Right. I'm trying to improve my German. So I missed it's brand new to me. So what's Chase been doing?
Okay. So long story short, Chase and myself, we were both trying to get our wives pregnant. And I think Chase had some good news that he didn't publicize yet. So we'll have to wait for his announcement. But he got back on cycle after like months off steroids, right? Doing a similar fertility protocol that I was doing. Then he went back on cycle and he blew up. Yeah. He exploded. Now, of course, he's running 5 grams of steroids and 18 units of growth. So that's the want to be IFB pro cycle. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. He's 280
don't
pounds.
Do this so he's at home, kids, right?
Yeah, so, don't do this at home. Yeah, he's 280 pounds. So at least he's putting it to work. But he gained like 40, 50 pounds, I think, in 3 months. Yeah, it's insane. So, and I think the reason why he responded so well is because his SHBG was quite high. I mean, he gained some body fat. He was semi-androgen deficient, and similar as mine levels. So my testosterone levels are like 660, 700 nanograms per deciliter. But my SHBG is 60, 70 nanomoles per liter. So that's like free testosterone non-existent, right? That's why I look so slim in the face now.
Yeah, right.
So I think this is also one of the reasons why progress is being made so fast, because you got a lot of this extra activity through the SHBG RC receptor complex, a Megalin receptor. And once that activity goes down, you stop making progress. Now, of course, this is highly speculatory, but I've been actively trying to source recombinant SHBG. And I think I found the source.
Well, speaking of that, when someone goes, would you say 18 IUs of GH and then 5 grams?
5 grams a year. So that's 3,000 milligrams of testosterone and 1,500 milligrams of masterone or something like that.
Wow. I mean,
I've seen his blood work. It looks very, very good. So don't worry. I keep him under wraps.
For now, like 2 or 3 months into it. That's of course, that's non-sustainable. The thing that I wonder in that case, like if I had to prioritize the things that are probably contributing to this rapid regain of muscle, is he been that big before? Is he superseded where his
No, it's superseding. Yeah, this is the biggest and the leanest he's ever been. So I think he's 15 pounds off his potential last time. And I think it's mostly because he took such a long time off. Yeah. And he really focused on his health. And of course, you basically downregulate all the anabolic pathways. But in the background, you resensitize them. And of course, what is it called? The epigenetics, right? And the muscle memory and that kind of stuff will kind of kick in as soon as you get back on cycle. But yeah, he's like 10 pounds, 15 pounds bigger than he used to be.
Yeah. And there's satellite cells. He has the myonuclei that are more than likely there just waiting, to be called into action. Exactly. So I was going to say, if I had to prioritize what it is that's making him grow so quickly, I probably would put SHBG somewhere, lower on the list.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, top it's like, oh yeah, if that's all you got to do then is just go back on TRT and manipulate your SHBG and then boom, you'll just become a monster. Were it only so easy.
I wish, right? But I do think it has a little bit of a place. But at 18 units of growth and the 5 grams of steroids, I'm sure that's more pronounced than the SHBG.
It's interesting too, like just like kind of another thought, because this is a very complex system. And I haven't all got it straight in my head because there's just not enough research that I found to kind of like make sense of it all. But like there's one of the theories or some things that have been studied in the context of prostate cancer. So this Megalin receptor can bring vitamin D bound to SHBG or testosterone bound or DHT bound to SHBG. Right. So one of the thoughts connected with why African Americans, when they're so labeled in studies, have higher prostate cancer. There's the androgen receptor variability, CAG repeats and that sort of thing. Yeah, but there's also a tendency to have lower vitamin D, which would allow then more DHT to be bound to SHBG and then brought into the prostate, and they have more DHT in their prostate potentially for that reason. And as someone who has dark skin, you're not going to get the vitamin. You're more susceptible to vitamin D deficiency.
Right.
Because you
That's
don't
true.
have the skin production. So
Right.
in that way, see, the thing is, there's a Megalin receptor in skeletal muscle, and I've only seen one study that was sort of, they compared young and old men. You may have seen this study, and they basically concluded that there's no differences really that they could discern in terms of upregulation or changes in the Megalin receptor in older versus young people. Just basically was non-responsive.
Right.
So that's what I wonder, like for things, and this applies to sexual development, like the prostate in particular. There we know that there's this Megalin receptor that's probably playing an important role, because you see all these deficiencies in sexual development in the knockout animal models. And I'd have to look. I don't remember seeing. I have to look at. I have to go back and look at the skeletal muscle and see what they find.
Right.
If there's a deficiency, that would be the key piece of evidence, and I haven't found that. I've looked, but I don't recall finding that. So if you don't have the Megalin receptor, and you could actually target that specifically to skeletal muscle. The gene.
I think there's inhibitors of the SHBG. Yeah, I think so. Let me
you look it up now. I know you.
I prepared some notes.
We got 2 hours here. Let's just dig on the Megalin receptor.
Yeah.
But that would be the interesting thing is to see how important is this Megalin receptor activation for skeletal muscle growth.
Right.
When you knock it out specifically in the skeletal muscle. Obviously, androgen receptor knockouts don't do well in terms of muscle.
No, nothing will happen. Yeah. Yeah, nothing will happen. But I do think it contributes, and it's purely going by helping people over the years just improve their blood work. You do see a clear correlation between feeling better and getting more productive in the gym by keeping SHBG somewhat elevated, which is always difficult when you're on dihydrotestosterone derivatives because they have such a high binding affinity, and thus delivery of SHBG goes up. And I always looked at SHBG similar to HDL. Right, it gets regulated by the amount of androgens that are in the bloodstream. The production and the utilization gets regulated. So, all right, let's not just spend 2 hours on the SHBG receptor. Let's go over the androgen receptor.
Okay.
What is funny that you mentioned that I wanted to get into was the GAC repeaters, which are apparently the higher binding affinity for the androgen receptors is partially regulated by the GAC repeaters, and the least amounts of GAC repeaters you have usually has higher binding affinity, and you generally see this in African or full American, African American or full African males. And with Caucasian males, they have a little bit higher GAC repeaters, and then some genetic polymorphisms have a lot of GAC repeaters, and then receptor sensitivity is lost again. And these we would classify as non-responders. And those guys are out there. I've coached them. They go on 2 grams of testosterone. Nothing happens.
And so people know, like this, what you're calling the GAC repeaters, that the CAG, those are the base pairs in this particular sequence on the gene for the androgen receptor. And so if you have more or less of those, it changes the length of the gene, length of the protein that becomes the androgen receptor, the proteins. And because two pieces come together, but then you change the shape of the lock. So when the key of the androgen comes in to open that lock, if the lock is not shaped as well, or is different, the sensitivity becomes different, then you can't open the lock as well. So you don't get, it changes the shape of the whole complex, and that changes how it interacts with the genes and to what extent you get the androgen sensitive gene expression. So that gene's super important, right? Yeah. So and there is. Go ahead.
I do think it's also present in Caucasians. I mean, I think this is one of the key changes in people with average response or phenomenal super response to taking steroids, and then the receptor binding and the affinity and the sensitivity. I think a lot of the IFBB pros, you would see that they use maybe very basic small cycles. That's why they're still healthy after so many years of competing. They take maybe a gram and a half in total, right, of various compounds. But their GAC repeaters are so short that they get these amazing receptor binding, and thus a lot of gene transcription. So they basically get the same gene expression that other people would get for 2.5 grams a year, or maybe 3 grams.
What's really interesting, and I came across this again because I just read through some things just for fun to kind of get my mind into the molecular biology of what we're talking about today. And the androgen receptor gene is on the X chromosome. So for men, they get it from their mom. So guys like Sergio Oliva or Lee Labrada or Hunter Labrada, right? They're not getting their androgen receptor gene from their dads. They're getting other genes, of course, naturally, that are helping them with bodybuilding. And I don't know what Sergio's mom looked like. I don't know anything about her.
I think she was just a normal
Caucasian.
Yeah,
woman.
Caucasian, just normal physique. And
Right.
yeah, I think she was just an average woman that eventually married Sergio Oliva, and then I think they divorced at one point.
Right.
Yeah. But when you look at the body composition of Hunter Labrada and Sergio Oliva, they're actually bigger and denser and more muscular than their parents. But of course, that's also a sign of the times, right? We're knowing a lot more about pharmacology and bodybuilding in general compared to back then.
Yeah. Well, Hunter's mom is pretty tall. I think she's like 5 or 6 inches taller than Lee. She's pretty tall.
Good.
She's a beautiful woman. She's big and she's trained. She's a muscular person.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so that's probably part of that. But that is the interesting thing. I don't think those guys were using there as much as what's being used today.
No.
Like they're doing it very, very differently.
My kids are going to be lucky if they get the androgen receptor from my wife, because naturally she has higher testosterone levels. And of course, she never placed out of the top 3 when she was doing bikini/figure competitions. It's like wellness before there was wellness. So it's in between bikini and figure, but then excluding the androgens on the day of the competition, obviously. Right? I'm not going into details, but I did help her here and there. So she responded very well to these things that are involved in bodybuilding. And that's why we always had to keep her protocols quite moderate, so she didn't get into virilization effects. And so if my kids inherit her androgen receptor, maybe a little bit of back and calf development on my end, then I think they will be good bodybuilders.
Right. Yeah. She has high testosterone naturally. So you've had this, obviously, blood work to substantiate this, but
so
you haven't probably done a genetic test for her androgen receptor. So it may be maybe a little both.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a Scandinavian study that I can send you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Scandinavian study. And there was like 6 women. It was a very, very small number of subjects, and they trained them for probably longer than 12 weeks. They typically did longer training studies, and the correlation between muscle growth and testosterone, I think it was total testosterone levels, was 1.0. So perfect correlation, or like 0.99 is like what?
Yeah.
So there's a lot there. It's a lot there. So anyway, I kind of cut you off, but I can send you that study if I can find it. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, please, if you can find it. Otherwise, I'll have a look for it and I'll link it down below, because everybody's going to ask about it now. Maybe they want to marry Scandinavian women for the most anabolic children they can get.
but there was some low and some high. So you're going to have, like anywhere, you're going to have, normal distribution.
No, if you want to go that route, you send them in for genetic analysis first, and then you can only get married if they have high testosterone levels and high or low GAC repeaters on the androgen receptor. And then you're the perfect specimen, my Amazonian goddess. Let's get hitched.
That's what I wondered, because interesting, like if you believe, let's say, and this is kind of being overly sciencey and nerdy about this, but if you believe in what the statistics would suggest, let's say you have a correlation of, and you got normal distribution, blah, blah, and correlation of 0.99 or 1, that would suggest that all of their variability in muscle growth can be attributed to, in this case, I believe it was total testosterone level. Maybe it was free. I can't remember, one of the two.
Right.
All of it. That means nothing else matters. Scientifically, looking at that. So the androgen receptor wouldn't make a difference whatsoever, because it's strictly testosterone in this case. But I don't think that's how it works. I think we've got this androgen receptor gene polymorphism at play. We have people with especially women with naturally higher testosterone levels. We've got the phosphodiesterase, the enzymes that cleave away the esters of esterified hormones and give you greater bioavailability. There's all these things, plus things going on in the muscle that all add up. And once you have like 5 or 10 of the main players in your favor, you got a freak. You got someone who's just out of this world.
Exactly. So we'll do our genetic analysis when we go back to the United States at the end of this year, because we'll do the Swiss symposium and then the Mr. Olympia, obviously. And you'll be there again. But genetic testing in Thailand isn't available. They only have Circle DNA, which doesn't give you the in-depth insight you would like to have from like 23andMe or some of the other services. So I'll order a saliva kit when I go back to the US, and then me and my wife will both do it. And then hopefully by the time she's already pregnant, so we can kind of guesstimate what the baby will be.
You're not going to find a renegade scientist and try to manipulate the video. Okay, this is what we got.
No.
Right?
I mean, I think that's a little bit in its infancy. You can actually go to where was it? I think there's a couple countries that offer it where you can select the eye color and the gender and so many different things and exclude some of the defects, right? So it's pricey though, but of course it will be well worth it. But I think it's a little bit in its infancy to really start dabbling with that. I mean, we're talking about the life of a person.
Yeah.
I do know 2 people who've done it. They did IVF and then gene manipulation, and they have healthy children.
Okay.
Yeah, let's give them 15 years,
Yeah, there's a couple movies, I think, too, or maybe, I don't know much about this. You know more than I do, but where you would fertilize, or the theory or the idea would be you fertilize multiple eggs, and then you do a genotype somehow.
And select the ones. Yeah.
And then select the ones that we're going to have the characteristics that you'd like to see. So this one's going to be a little bit shorter, but have more intelligence. We want the tall one, the tall and pretty, but not so smart. Like, we have various features we can get, so you can build your own burrito, so to speak, in terms of your offspring.
And then they grow up and they wonder, like, why are my parents so short and so small? And am I adopted? I think you get into those issues because they don't look anything like the parent.
It can happen. It can totally happen, though. I like my aunt and my uncle, both brown hair, brown eyes, and both of their children both my cousins have blonde hair and blue eyes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this one, unfortunate.
Any side missions?
There's no mailman that looked like no Scandinavian mailman that I'm aware of. Nothing like that.
Exactly.
There was a guy I played football with who was like an All-American, and his dad was like 5'4", and he was 6'4". His dad was a muscular guy, but he's probably 180 pounds, and his son was 280 coming out of high school. He went, played professional football. So you'd see the 2 of them, and it was like the father and son. Their roles were juxtaposed because the son was much bigger than the dad. So
I think it's also like the amount of protein intake that you have in your younger years, because the amount of protein signaling that increases height. Right. And if you eat a little bit better, your estrogen levels are better manipulated, and that helps with the growth plates and all that stuff, so you can be taller. I think, if you give your kids like a head start regarding nutrition and exercise and overall, health, then you can actually get them a lot taller. So with me, the opposite happened. My mom is shorter than me, and my dad is taller than me. But I think it's because I started bodybuilding at the age of 15 and I didn't understand nutrition. I was just chronically undereating. Yeah. And that's why I didn't get as tall. And I was a little bit of a skinny fat kid when I was younger, so my estrogen levels were probably higher. So my growth plates closed earlier, minimizing the maximum height that I could have reached.
Yeah. I had a swim coach who actually he was in Sports Illustrated. They had like a Faces in the Crowd, this kind of extraordinary athletic feats, and he was in a relay. So he had kind of a jump start, but he set a world record in the 50-meter freestyle at the age of like 44 or something like that.
Wow.
And he was a really good swimmer. Swam, kind of like what wrestlers do, gymnasts do, what you were kind of doing as a bodybuilder. He was, undernourished relative to his caloric expenditure. And he was like, he went to swim in college, and finally he had access to all you can eat at the cafeteria. Right. And he could nourish himself the way he wasn't like stuck in school, like, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or whatever. And swimmers train, they're just notorious for just massive volume training.
I used to do that before I did bodybuilding. I used to swim like hours per week.
Yeah.
That probably stunted my growth also, because you want to be competitive. And I started swimming because I had asthma. So going to the swimming pool, it was the cleanest air environment we had, because air purifiers were not a thing in the early 80s. That's how old I am. From the early 80s. So at the time, air purifiers we didn't have. And if you suffer from asthma, going to the swimming pool was the best environment for you to breathe normally. You could regulate your breathing. So I did it since I was 3 years old. Yeah, from 3 to 15. So I swam competitively, and I wasn't very good, but we used to swim quite a bit.
2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. Like that's was
like 2 hours a day. Yeah.
Well, he was swimming more than that. Like there was a guy that I went to high school with he went and swam in college too. And I swam in high school. I was the captain of my high school football team our high school swim team and football team, but swim teams.
Awesome.
But we weren't very good. We were awful. I was okay as a kid, but we just fucked around. We didn't swim much. But this guy did. The thing that happened to him, but in like his freshman and sophomore year, he grew, I think, 8 inches or 10 inches.
Wow.
And he went from
started eating.
He started eating. Yeah. And he caught up on that growth. Right. So that's the thing I wonder, is to what extent that can happen. It can't happen in gymnasts, but for him, he grew almost a foot. So he went from, X number of strokes to get X bar in the pool. Now it's, I don't know the exact numbers, but, his used to take him 21 strokes, and now it took him 17 because he's now got a wingspan that's like, 8 inches greater.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I should stop training for a year also, see if I can get any taller than 5'9".
18 is a growth hormone, right? See if you grow. Don't do it. No, don't.
Don't do it. No. There's not enough telmisartan and pacliflozin in the world to mitigate the side effects. I'm over it. I'm going to be a dad soon. Whatever muscle I have right now, just TRT. That's it.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the androgen receptor.
Okay.
So
yes,
we have so many androgens, right, that we can utilize. Testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, masterone, primobolan, trenbolone, everybody's favorite. Also interacts with the progesterone receptor.
Yeah.
But when we look at it, you see that androgens don't only interact with the androgen receptor, also interact with the progesterone, the estrogen, and some of the other receptors. So I would like to ask you, should we hammer the androgen receptor doing a 5-gram cycle, or should we just do it a little bit more modestly and look into overlap between other receptors and of course going into the growth hormone receptor pathway and the insulin receptor, IGF-1, etc. After so many years in bodybuilding, doing so many research, what would you say is the best approach, the safest approach when it comes to these pathways?
To be honest with you, take a step back. I avoid drug talk at all possible, to be honest. And I
really?
I really don't, even on my podcast, with my consultations, I think there you are. You're back. I let people ask whatever question they want, and I'll give them my best answer. So I am never prescriptive as far as this. Okay. I really am not. But here's the thing that's interesting, and this is why I don't think why these questions are still being answered, not being answered, still being asked.
Okay.
Is that we are talking about, and I've got a post I'm kind of developing. I'm looking back to sort of to be able to substantiate some of these things. We're talking about a male who produces a primary antigen of testosterone to the tune of 7 to 10 milligrams a day, right?
Right.
So normally you think about homeostatic mechanisms, kind of like a thermostat at home, and we're going to regulate around that. That's what sort of happens. You go much above that, maybe with 300 milligrams testosterone. Some people get estrogenic side effects, some people don't. The whole system, that would normally shut down the testosterone. The whole system's set up to regulate around there. And you would expect to, in many cases, this is the case with many systems, that once you go to super physiological levels, you get desensitization. The androgen receptor tends to upregulate in so many cases, but you still see desensitization. There's other mechanisms involved there. So we got a system that's sort of set up to work within these physiological parameters. And now we're adding in other drugs that bind the androgen receptor, and we're adding them in amounts that are way beyond what the system has genetically attuned itself to through evolutionary processes, right? So now, I'm going to just say it, it's kind of a crapshoot in large part. For the reason that we talked about. Yeah, it's a crapshoot.
It is.
If you have, X number of CAG repeats, and there's another segment of the androgen receptor that hasn't been substantiated as being that important, at least in ways that we can discern with the studies that are out there, but does change the shape. And there's a couple, I can't remember which, I can find it. I have it somewhere in my database.
There's some mutations to it.
There's different phenotypes or genotypes there.
Well, you have two isoforms, right? You have an androgen receptor A and B, and one is 87 kilodaltons, and the B is 110 kilodaltons. Just pulling this off of Wikipedia, by the way. So
receptors or androgen receptor?
Androgen receptors is apparently two isoforms.
Oh,
an A and a B.
There's probably multiple, because there's the classical, and then there's the membrane bound, which is a whole other situation.
Of course.
Right. So then we think about this lock and key hypothesis, very simple way to think about it. So now you're talking about you go to 5 grams a week, or let's say you go to 2.5 or 2,700 milligrams a week. Now you're way beyond physiological levels. And and so your personal
100x.
Yeah, exactly. So your personal dose response there is going to vary depending on just that one aspect of your androgen receptor, and then all the other downstream elements that are involved in translating that signal, transducing that signal into expression, in this case, of protein synthesis, whatever, and then whatever binding affinity your progesterone receptor, your glucocorticoid receptor, your estrogen receptor might have to that steroid hormone. That's just for testosterone. And then when we start taking other androgens into account, now we're jamming other keys in all of those locks, all of which are unique to you. So you're like that janitor, right? Everyone's a janitor with and you've got all these keys, all the different androgens you can try. And you have your own locks. Let's say they're all lined up on your midsection here. And you're trying to jam them in there and try to figure out how to open up things as best you possibly can. Your lock and your combination of those locks is going to vary depending on who you are, who your parents were.
Right. So are you not, wait, let me interject real quick. Are you now saying that we can only get the answers through self-experimentation?
Well, I think there's an answer that it's going to be highly variable, whether you're willing to risk that, and the thing is, to some degree, that's what it's going to come down to. The thing is,
let's ask the audience. Let us know down below if you're willing to risk opening all these locks with testosterone derivatives. Put it in the comment section, guys, please.
I'm sure that's what they're here for, right?
That's what they're here for, yeah.
That's what they're looking for. I saw some. You know who Harrison Pope is? He's a psychologist who's done. I think he's finding stuff. He's a psychologist, done all the stuff sort of on anabolic steroid dependence and addiction, and a lot of epidemiological work. And he has a paper. He's got a couple papers where he's sort of documented one of the idea that multiple studies have kind of done just surveys, and they're flawed to some degree because they go into gyms and they ask steroid users or people going to be anonymous.
About fill out the survey.
Fill out the survey thing, right? And it shows depending on which of these studies look at, 15, 20, maybe as much as 30% have dependence. They match the DSM criteria for dependence. So that's the risk. It's kind of like if you're going to start opening up those locks, when doing so, if you're someone who tends to have quote unquote an addictive personality, I'm using the kind of layman term here, then you have maybe about a 1 in 3 chance or 1 in 4 chance of developing a dependence where you can't help yourself but want to keep on wanting to stick different keys in, different steroids. And to some degree, that's the thing. You stick in trenbolone. It's a good example, right? It's like, this is a really good androgen. This is a really good key for the androgen receptor lock.
Yeah.
But it also, I didn't mean to stick it in the progesterone receptor. Whoopsie. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And then we have all these issues where, one person says, hey, I'm doing 600 milligrams of trenbolone and my sex drive is out of the roof and everyone's happy and, I'm doing things that I never thought I'd do sexually, what have you. And then someone else is.
This is very common. I mean, I'm in Thailand. I see it happen around me all the time.
Yeah.
The sexual deviancy induced by trenbolone. I had a very good podcast with Dr. Dean St. Mart about the neurological effects about these steroids. And this is where the dependency comes from, because your dopaminergic system is so upregulated. And now you get dependent on the superphysiological level of steroids. And whether that's testosterone or some of the other ones, I mean, this is one of the reasons why most people that come off after decades of steroid use, they're not as productive and their libido is not as high and their mood is not as good. This is exactly, I'll raise my hand the first one. I'll be the first one to admit it. This is exactly what I'm undergoing right now, right? Motivation and drive and all that stuff is just at an all-time low, even though clinically I'm still in the reference range, 600, 700 nanograms per deciliter. You do create a little bit of a dependency.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm secretly fantasizing about going back on TRT. Even though I'm fully functional. I'm fully functional. Right now, everybody knows. As soon as I start growing, people know exactly what's going on. And I'm transparent about it, right? I'm not going to hide it from people. But I'm secretly fantasizing about my next cycle and whatever that might be. Because I do feel that productivity is up, libido is up, basically quality of life is up. And this is the risk that everybody runs when they start dabbling with, performance enhancing drugs, particularly steroids. Once you get used to racing or driving at 100 kilometers per hour, going back to 60, it's kind of slow. But you're still driving.
The thing that's interesting, and I picked up on this in my learning German here recently, is when dopamine's released, that also causes the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is very important for forming neural networks, right? So our brain is basically, and I'm stealing these thoughts from a guy named Manfred Spitzer. He's a German he's a physician and a sort of neurophysiologist. He talks a lot about cell phone use and social media and loneliness. And our brain, and those things are very closely tied, unfortunately. The more social media, the more lonely you tend to be on average.
Thank God we grew up in a day without it. Now we can utilize it to our benefits. But all these kids, I really worry for them. Fuck, that's where
I'm going. Is that when you, for instance, if you're in a situation where your dopamine levels are elevated and you've changed the neurochemical state of your brain, every time you can't help but learn. Your brain is constantly, every time you have an experience, it basically leads to a mechanical changing. You're basically restructuring as they say, the neurons that fire together, wire together. So you're constantly learning. And the more excited you are about things, the better your learning process, the more of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor goes. So if you're constantly you're up when you're on gear, let's say, you're basically rewiring your brain to be one that, of course, functions on gear. You're sort of setting your brain up to have a dependency on that for what your cognitively, your perceptually would see as a normal way of being. So everything's then shifted, right?
Yeah,
and then when you come off it, right? And that's the side back to your question that sort of led us this direction is, if you're willing to start picking at those putting those keys in to the locks, not knowing, to what extent they're going to impact you, the issue that this catch-22 that you can run into is that to some degree, now you're changing your perception of reality with the dopamine. You're changing your brain, essentially. And you can no longer then step back outside of yourself and as the watcher, so to speak, see how you've changed and what you're changing yourself into that you can't necessarily hold without this exogenous substance or the exogenous substances, which can be not the best thing for your health to hold you in place. So you lose your objectivity. And this is probably the worst with women, I think, because they respond so much to androgens, so tremendously to androgens, but their psychology can change, I think, even more so than men. Because we're already wired, generally to be in an androgenic way, let's say, whereas women, one of my best friends from years ago, she was a high level bodybuilder. She would have been a pro easily. Nowadays they've got the cards. And she said she learned so much because she was trained with a bunch of guys and they kind of made her into a lab rat, right? And they gave her a bunch of stuff and she just grew. She's okay. She came out of it all right. It didn't fuck her up. She's one of my best friends. She's super solid, but she'd been, in relationships and had been through her trials and tribulations relationship wise. She was actually grateful because she knew she had a sense that she knew what it was like to think like a man with those androgens in there, to think like, hey, okay, I'm done with you. Get out of my bed and go home. Like the stuff that, an asshole guy would do. She had those thoughts and that's not her.
Right. No,
and she could step
but
back
that's androgen mediated. Yeah.
It's androgen mediated, and it's not, Robert Sapolsky would say testosterone makes us pro-social. And maybe some androgens make us pro-asshole. I don't know exactly. Yeah,
I'm sure. Yeah. And it's the same as alcohol in that extent, right? If you're already in a little bit of a asshole tendency before you drink alcohol or before you take the Trenbolone sandwich, then you get worse on it. Now, I vouched never to touch Trenbolone 8 years ago when my wife kind of asked me to stop. So I haven't touched it in such a long time, and most of my progress I've made since then. So I do know that you can make progress without the Trenbolone sandwich. But you do notice, and on Tren, you don't notice how much of an arrogant a-hole you are, right? And how single-mindedly driven you are for your bodybuilding tendencies and nothing else. Right? Forget about making money or doing other stuff. You just want to train, eat, sleep, and fuck, basically on Tren. or the high enough dose. And then you come off of it, and again, you can take a step backwards for, running that amount of, androgens. And then you realize, like, wait a minute, I was a different person, sexual deviancy and aggression and all these weird things started to happen to my body. But in the moment, you don't realize it because it feels so normal. And then when you do come off it, you realize, like, wait a minute, I was different. I mean, I realize it now that I'm different compared to being on just basic TRT, even though I will say that I like myself more on TRT than I do now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just from a business perspective, like there's so many guys using TRT for their, entrepreneurial benefit because they feel more driven and they can work longer and they sleep better and all these little underlying issues that they had while being, with a testosterone of 500 to 700 nanograms per deciliter, they no longer have because now they're at 1,000 or 1,200, maybe slightly super physiological, and they feel 10 times better. And then all these little issues that they would be frustrated about, loss of motivation or loss of sleep or whatever, those are non-issues, and thus they can perform better. This is why TRT is so popular now. And of course, the dopamine levels are, positively correlated with testosterone levels. So the higher testosterone is, the higher your dopamine levels are going to be. And thus the brain-derived neurotropic factor goes up and you can learn more and be more productive and memory or recollection and that kind of stuff. So it is hard to stop after you see that your income goes from, let's say, $50,000 to $100,000. And we'll leave it up to the audience to think if that's per year or per month. It can be a big difference. Yeah, it can be a big difference. It can be a big difference. Yeah.
Have you ever read Brown Sicard? I think is how you say his name. Who sort of discovered testosterone. He was sort of the first people to sort of isolate it. He was a researcher,
the German scientist.
I think it may have been French. Sicard.
Oh, French. Yeah.
I think it may have been French. And he
I tried to
isolated
look
it.
what
And then
was the first. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but he basically did TRT. He was like in his 70s, and there's I've seen this depicted a couple times that he injected into himself, and it used to be like he worked in his lab and he could only like stand working for like an hour, and then he went to where he could stand for like 3 or 3.5 hours, right? And then normally you'd have to take a break, and that would be the end, and then he would then be able to work for like another hour and a half past that, So he literally saw psychological performance enhancement. Those were sort of the first performance enhancing effects that were attributed to testosterone. So, and the thing about THC go ahead, please.
Yeah, especially if he was 70. I mean, he probably was like low levels. So he was the first guy on TRT. Was this the guy that got the Nobel Prize for his work on sex hormones? I think he shared it with somebody. I think one of the earliest developers on sex hormones, including testosterone.
Kokakian, maybe who you're.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He has got the most beautiful book, the steroids book, steroid handbook. What is it called? It's like 650 pages of literature.
It's really expensive too. Yeah, it's really expensive.
I have it though. I bought it.
Okay,
I bought it. I love that book. I
didn't buy it. I probably should. Yeah,
I'll send it to you. It's a PDF.
Okay.
Don't tell anybody.
I don't like taking. I've had so much of my copyrighted stuff stolen. I shan't do it to anyone else.
Tell me about it. Like I'm sure your beer on Bodybuilding Coach. I'm sure it's being able to be downloaded. All my eBooks are out there for free. And I mean, what can you do? Fingers crossed. Somebody gets some benefits and then gets a little bit of a karma and says, you know what, this ebook was so beneficial, I'm going to buy it. Right? Yeah. That's what I hope for. Right?
So, I've gotten that a couple times. I think most, and we're getting off topic now, but I think most of the time when people they're just looking for something free, quick, and easy, and they're like, oh, I'm not going to buy the book. Those people don't benefit from it a lot of the times, unfortunately, because they just, when they get into my book, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to have to read all these pages. Like, I just want to know just tell me what I'm supposed to do.
I loved that book.
Yeah.
I loved it. I read it like 3 times and I went through all the references because you have so many. And it's such a great learning, even for advanced bodybuilders who've been doing this for such a long time. You think and then you read your book and you're like, wait a minute, I'm maybe 50% there. Yeah, really. I mean, it's a good, guys, I'll link it down below. Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. It's one of the best books if you're into next level bodybuilding. It'll open your mind. Yeah.
So back to this question though, with the locks on the, and all the keys and this sort of thing, because this is super important. This is the main question,
Yeah.
Should I do this? Should I not do this? And I think before you start doing it, you have to realize that each of these locks opens up a Pandora's box. Maybe one other way to look at it. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if you're in that 30%, you might develop a dependence. I'll never forget one of my earliest shows. There was a guy who won the show. He looked amazing. He could have easily gone on and maybe even gotten a pro card. And this was this was in like 2003, I think. And I remember I was sitting like right next to him in the athletes meeting. This is before the show even. And he just destroyed everybody. And he said, all I want to do is be done with this and try and see if I can rectify all of my failed relationships, all the stuff that I fucked up in the last 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
He was because he realized this, I never saw him again. And I know that I did see him a couple of years later. He was hypogonadal and struggling with how to come out of that. And this is before, people knew what we kind of know today. But so you're opening up all those things. And the thing that I would encourage people to do is to think about before you open those is to think, so what do I have to fall back on? And I know you trained for many, 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 many years before you decided to become a Sith Lord. Yeah, right?
Yeah. 10 years, drug-free. Right. I didn't go anywhere, but I was also a full-time business consultant. So this is just like an afterthought, like a crazy hobby that I love to do research, love to train. Right. But I was trying to make a career in financial business consulting. And then just like what is happening now, we had a little bit of an economic crisis and there were no jobs. So then I decided to get my hands dirty, but I was already 26. So that's like grandpa level compared to the kids, what they're doing nowadays. I mean, I see kids in my comment section, 17 years old, 18 years old on testosterone and trenbolone and stuff. It's crazy.
And your brain is not fully formed. The prefrontal cortex, it's like roughly 25.
Right.
And I would suggest people pick up Robert's the people who I'm suggesting this to are not to be the ones who are going to read
They're not going to read it. No, whatever.
Yeah.
Deeble only cycles. That's what they're going to do.
Yeah. Right. Fortunately. But the basic idea is that, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm trying to tell you that you don't know to some degree what you'll know 10 years later, by the time you're 25 or when you're 26, like, okay, I've been at this for 10 years. I've been training. I know that I can fall back and you still train. It's not like you're just like hanging out on the couch and whatever. I'm sure you still go to the gym.
I mean, I've been off cycle for 7 months. I still go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. Of course, I love it. I mean, training is the foundation. The rest comes afterwards, right? First, you learn how to train, then you learn how to diet, and then you learn how to supplement, and then maybe some performance-enhancing drugs later on under guidance. But I'll be the first one to admit it. At 26, I researched for already 5-6 years, right? Because I wanted to know what I was getting myself into. And now looking back, I knew fuck all back then. And I'm sure when I'm 50, I'll say the same thing. I knew fuck all when I was close to 40, which is where I am now, right?
Yeah.
So I think with every decade that you pass, especially now since I'm a full-time YouTuber and talking about these things multiple times per week, the older you get, the more you dive into it, the more you learn. And then, of course, with 10 years of more scientific literature, we'll know more. And like in the beginning, you see that certain practices we do are proven with scientific evidence, and then later on it's disproven again.
Yeah.
So everything keeps evolving, but that's why it is so interesting. But I mean, really understanding what you're getting yourself into, I think it takes a decade to learn that.
At least to have an inkling of whether you should start sticking one of those locks, one of those keys, one of those locks.
Well, we can take endocrinologists as an example. I mean, they have a 4-year, a 6-year, university, and then residency, internships, and then they get their medical license. So it's almost a decade before you're even allowed to talk about testosterone replacement therapy or insulin or some of the other endocrine hormones to patients. It takes a decade.
Yeah.
Yes. So how long did you wait, Scott?
My first tested show was I'd been training for 19 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's good. That's okay.
No, I mean, I just love to train. Like all that stuff. To be honest, to some degree, the drug stuff is not all that interesting. It's not because
of course, but that's what gets the views.
It is. Unfortunately. Yeah, and I think I should probably try to come up with a thought experiment. I'm kind of thinking of one now as we speak. Is that it's the thing, especially if you're starting before the age of 25, let's say you're only been training for a few years, when you're doing that, you're almost doing a deal with the devil in that you're increasing your likelihood of changing your brain.
Right.
You're increasing the likelihood that, when I've seen this so many times, and I am over 50, right? So I can, I mean, whatever that.
No, you've been around. Yeah,
you've been around for a little while. Yeah. As people who they don't want to train anymore. They're not, when they get to where you are, and of course you're entrenched in this, so that helps a lot. You've basically got kind of supporting environment. Like if you just stop training, like then your business would go to hell. It doesn't fit. Your whole life is sort of oriented, situated around training and bodybuilding, and mine always has been. I mean, I don't go to the gym. I go in my barn and train in the heat in Florida, Southern Florida, with no air conditioner.
Oh man,
because I want to.
That's what I do. Yeah, well, I do the same thing here. We in Muscle Factory, we don't have air conditioning. I go there 4 times a week, and one time a week I go to an air conditioned gym. Dude, I've been doing this for decades, just in the heat, and whether it's the middle of the day, and you still get it done. But we love it. This is how we got introduced. But I think a lot of people nowadays, they get introduced to fitness through social media, and they go for the look. Not for the camaraderie and the the subculture and the networking, and of course the training hard and setting goals and attaining them, just to training hard, and then figuring out what the ideal training strategy is, and whether it's dark crab training or fortitude training or mountain dog training, right? All these things you can explore, and you take the best parts out of all of it, which works with your body. Especially when you get older, fortitude training does start to make a lot more sense. So you don't, hammer your joints so much. And then, of course, the audience would say, no, Steve, just more nandrolone. More nandrolone, you'll be okay. Right. Yeah. At one point, you realize that, oh, wait a minute, I can't run even nandrolone anymore. So I do have to do some fortitude training. And these things are very, very interesting. But I found that, at least most of my audience, they just want to know about drugs. And then they go to Mike Israetel for the Renaissance periodization, and then they try to combine both.
Yeah, leave as many reps in reserve as you can, right? That's a joke. Just kidding.
Yeah, people will go nuts.
But when you do go to kind of the dark side, I mean, I don't. Has there ever been like a Sith Lord that then became a Jedi and went back? I don't know that they do. Like that's
many. Many. I've helped through consultations.
No, I mean like in the movies, in the Star Wars trilogy, like I'm just developing kind of an analogy here. Yeah.
I'd have to ask Yates of the Star Wars Theory, who was also part of the group, of the TRT group. And he's the expert, the resident expert on Star Wars. So Yates, if you're watching, just let us know down below if a Sith Lord went back to the Jedi, whether that's in the canon material or the non-canon material. I'm sure Yates will watch this video because he's also a fan of yours. So.
But I think there are certainly people who've gone back to TRT after having been on, there's many.
No, but off also. Yeah, I've talked to many.
Or off, right. So, but I think a large number of people just lose their love for the sport altogether. They lose everything.
Oh, that's very true. We can take Sean Ray as an example.
Yeah, I mean, see, I think he does love the sport. He doesn't like to train, right?
He doesn't train anymore.
And he was tremendously gifted. I mean, he looked the way he did at 21. I think he was the youngest person to win a pro card at that time. He was just crazy. True. But I think for some people, the large majority of people sort of in the central area of the bell curve with average genetics, who are being kind of disillusioned by what's possible for them based on social media, what have you, is that you have to, and it's kind of an unknown risk, but in large part, there's a giant risk that you're going to lose the possibility just because of maybe changing your brain chemistry, changing like what you get out of training. Like it's a totally different sense of when you just go in the gym and you don't have to, your diet can be shit. And like if you're blasting gear and you're going up by 10 pounds every time you do an exercise. Another time. You
can do everything wrong when you're on cycle, especially in the beginning, because you'll make those gains anyway if you do it right without the gear. But I mean, like in school, when I was going to high school, there were like 15, 16, 17-year-old kids that, grabbed the whole hand into the Anabolic jar that they got from Thailand, right? The Anabolic blue hearts, the pink ones. So they got the 1,000. The parents got the 1,000 tablet box of 5 milligrams, and they would just take a handful and go to the gym.
Yeah,
all those guys are nowhere to be found in the fitness industry.
They're gone.
But also, when I hear about when you have class and people like 10 years, 20 years later, they kind of, what is it called?
Class reunion.
Reunion, right. So they go to a reunion. I don't go because I'm in Thailand, but I heard through people that I'm still in touch with. They go to the reunion and these people have completely given up, but they're also not successful in anything that they do because I don't think they have the drive to really, because their dopaminergic system is still kind of messed up, even decades later.
I wonder too, there was, I think I heard this was Andrew Huberman. I was explaining this in German just a couple of days ago. There was a study. There's a couple interesting studies that have been done with children where they inform them, sort of tell them things like they give them a certain assignment and they tell one group, "Wow, you're just tremendously gifted. You're just like you just have a gift for this, you know." And then when they watch their performance thereafter, it goes down. But when they tell them, "Wow, you really gave a good go. Like you really stuck in there. You had a lot of fortitude. Like you're a real worker," their performance gets better.
Okay.
So when you and there's also, you know, things like when you give external rewards. So you take kids that just gravitate towards art, towards painting, or in this case, someone who might gravitate to the gym, which is probably a lot of people are listening. And if you take these kids and you take randomly select some of them and actually pay them, like give them monetary rewards or external rewards for an intrinsic behavior, it extinguishes that intrinsic behavior. So if you go into the gym, let's say, and you're making crazy gains and you're posting on Instagram and everyone's saying, "Yeah, you're jacked, you're a monster, blah, blah, blah."
It's good enough.
External reward coming in, not because, wow, I feel like I got something done. I went after it today. I trained my ass off. You know, I really enjoyed that. And now you actually have, so you got external reward, and you've got on top of that this feeling like, wow, this just comes easy to me, because it does come easy to you. It's kind of like you're being told that you're really gifted. Those are two things, at least from I'm extrapolating. This is kind of I'm really pulling it away here, but I think there's some phenomenology that's involved here with what's going on that will tend to really strongly extinguish the behavior later on in life of actually going to the gym and training where you're no longer on. And the dopaminergic effects, permanently downregulating that system, epigenetic issues, what have you. So you're changing your brain, you're rerouting the development of your prefrontal cortex and your brain, because it's still not fully formed until maybe you're in your mid-20s. So you're changing your brain, you're permanently screwing up your neurotransmitter levels, and you're having these psychological impacts because the nature of the reward and what it's telling you about what you can do. And then like there's all sorts of thought experiments where you say, hey, what if you, I read one the other day, like, what if you could be given an IQ of 500 points, right? Which is, unthinkable, but you lose one IQ point every day.
It goes to 240, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Like no one's ever tested about like 220 or whatever. They're not even valid on like 150, 180, depending on which one, but 500 is just like, your AI level intelligence, but you lose a point every day. So in 2 years or so, you're back down to average level. And then eventually you become, basically you can't really even think.
We got to say the air words, but then we get blocked on YouTube.
Say what? Yeah, exactly.
You got to say the air words, but then you get blocked on YouTube.
Right. Yeah. I've learned this. Scott McNally's taught me well to avoid certain words.
Right. I'll filter it out. Don't worry.
But that's the thing is, like, once then you've obtained that, which you've grown like crazy without having to have anything to do, then you may be predestined yourself in these ways I just explained to not being able to enjoy the process. It may be a one-way street that once you get off, that's it. You're done. Some people do. Some people don't. Yeah.
Maybe that's the reason why so many fitness celebrities, like the social media personas, they fizzle out when they get an injury, or they fizzle out when they have a health complication. They get off cycle and they disappear.
Yeah.
I mean, we see the turnover of these influencers is sky high. Yet the bodybuilders, they stay here for decades.
Yeah.
Because most of us we're built in fire, right? In the dungeons and the gyms, and it doesn't matter what divorce, gym. Right? Financial problems, gym. Off cycle, gym. Just eat a little bit more, right? On cycle, gym harder, but then at least you mitigate some of the effects, and at least we don't use that much. I think for us, gym is kind of the fixture of everything.
Yeah.
And whether we're on or off cycle, it doesn't really change. Let's say you do decide to start opening some keys, the androgen receptors, and whether that goes into the progesterone receptor or the estrogen receptor or some of the other ones, and blocking the glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid receptors. Let's say you do that. You decide willingly, with a decade of research, to go that route, and you're ready to face all the consequences.
Okay.
Are there some guidelines to do that as healthy as possible? Right, without going into dosages or particular practices, let's focus on health.
Okay.
Like, what would be your suggestion not to damage yourself permanently?
First, go to your channel and listen to everything, literally, because that's your thing. Go to your channel, listen to all your videos, read all your articles. I think you have some lists of the supplements that you take, the things you do. I think Victor Black has a nice model too. He's worth listening to. John Jewett has a very similar one. Those guys have talked with one another. They have their feud or whatever that's going on now. I'm not sure where they stand. I think everybody
had a feud with Victor at this point.
Yeah. I haven't, but
you're one of the few. Yeah. I think. But for how long? Now you're on my now you're on my podcast. You might get it. You might get it too. Yeah.
It's funny because I'd never really had a feud with anybody. I just don't. I just try to help everyone I possibly can.
No, but you're a very likable guy, and I don't think I've ever caught you in a mistake. So that's commendable. Also,
there's lots of
them. Really. Yeah, really? Okay. Because I mean, I've been listening to you for such a long time, and then of course I follow all of the other educators, and then sometimes I raise an eyebrow like that. Probably not true or incorrect or dogmatic approaches. But when it comes to you, that's why I still follow you, besides the other educators, because I never really hear you make a blatant mistake. And you're always positive about it. Yeah, unless you can name an example. But I know many other educators, including myself, that occasionally make a mistake and then you have to go back and kind of redo a video or redo an article or redo your stance in general because you'll learn something new.
I guess maybe there's so many of them. Like I'll just keep going. I'm trying to think. Right. One thing too with the PhD, the pilot higher and deeper, is you learn how to contextualize your comments, your thoughts, right? So that you don't really, if you don't really know something, it's just you say you don't know, which is often the case.
Oh, that's a skill on its own.
Yeah, it's super important.
That's a skill on its own. I mean, there's plenty of people in our space that would just talk gibberish. and no, really, they because they want to show expertise, but they really don't have an idea what they're talking about. So that's why I think a little bit of humility is also a skill that people need to have, so they can say, well, you know what, I don't know, but give me a week, and then I might have an answer for you. It happens to me in the Vigorous Q&A, which is always on Saturday, where people ask me something, and sometimes it's really in depth. I'm like, I can't give you an answer because I might know next week, but this time I don't know. And if it's interesting, I'll take a note about it and start researching. Because in the end, you got to give the audience what they want. That's how you grow the YouTube channel.
Right. It's funny. You probably get this too. People presume they hear me talk about something that sounds like I'm speaking intelligently or I have some depth of knowledge. And then they just presume that there's this logical fallacy that takes, they just presume that I know everything about everything. And they say, what about this? I have like this, type 2, type 3 genetic disorder, whatever. And I'm like, and I'm taking these 4 drugs. What do you think? I'm like, I have no idea. I have to Google what that is, and I know what the drugs do. And like, I can't possibly answer that question.
No, it happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Especially now that I start branching out into anti-aging and then longevity stuff. I mean, what people are doing in that space, it's there's a lot left to learn. Like I think I have a good grasp on bodybuilding and these androgen the anabolic pathways. I think I know that pretty well already. Of course, there's a lot more to learn, but when I start branching out to the longevity, the sirtuins, right, and the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide and all this anti-aging stuff, I mean, it's a whole different kind of worms.
Yeah, nootropics are another one. You go into
well, that I'm looking into. So cerebral license, max, lang, dihexa, all these compounds that increase neurogenesis and brain-derived neurotropic factor, which you can actually inject. No, but it's pig-derived. So it's pig brain derived. Awesome. Yeah, porcine derived. Yeah, just like insulin used to be. It's highly purified though, but still some issues or risks attached to it, potential risks.
Yeah.
And something like SSRIs, for neurogenesis, like vortioxetine or fluvoxamine. I've experimented with all of those, and I will say that the effects are quite pronounced and can actually undo some of the damage caused by steroids.
Okay. The psychological, at least like in terms of the neurological damage, things can be reversed.
Neurological, psychological, like lingering anger issues that you might have that you think you're resolving with training, but actually keeping elevated by training.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, or at least I used to be in the beginning, like psychological issues when you're like 15, 16 years old, like parents divorcing, all kinds of trauma. And then you go to the gym to kind of resolve that because you have an outlet of your aggression. And that's like therapy for you. And then a decade later, you're still using this aggression as an outlet to train hard, to kind of dumb you down. It's kind of the reason why people smoke weed, basically, to kind of dumb themselves down. Now you train so hard with the dog crap training and high intensity training, Mike Minzer stuff, just to make yourself tired. So you can't feel angry, through your puberty years.
Yeah.
And then you realize that you're not really resolving that. You're just
reinforcing it.
You're reinforcing that. And I see this with so many people who love progressive overload.
Done it.
They use the aggression as fuel, but the aggression just lingers. And then you do some reps in reserve, right, to keep your mental clarity going, and you use selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor for neurogenesis or cerebralizing or Semax or Slank, and now all this aggression is gone. All this anger is gone. This is what I noticed the last 2 years experimenting with these compounds. All the anger is gone. But it also means I can't train as hard as I used to be. Yeah.
The thing I wonder, and this is sort of a parallel between like just using SSRIs or antidepressants in general and doing therapy, is that there has to be some. This is, we're going to get way off topic now, but for instance, one of the things
that's fine. That's why I got you. I mean, the rabbit holes are endless, so that's why I want to talk to you.
I did something called EMDR many moons ago. Have you heard of?
Right. Yeah. How was that?
It worked tremendously well for me. I had been actually, I was in a point in my life where I basically kind of felt like relationships ended, wasn't connected with friends, didn't have strong parental connections at the time either. So I'm like, I got bodybuilding my dogs. I went to go actually compete in a bodybuilding show. Strange sequence of events happened, and 2 of my 3 dogs died. The one dog who's there behind me, he's the one. He's the one who survived. He's the one I dedicated my Beyond Bodybuilding Coach book to.
Right.
Because if it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't be around here because I didn't have anything at that point in my life. Highly traumatizing.
Yeah,
so that's why. Oh yeah, I mean, kind of saw them die in my eyes. It was in my arms right before my eyes. But what I did, and this is the opposite of what happens when you take that anger and rejuvenate it and try to channel it into the training, is in EMDR, they apply some techniques to try to coordinate the left and right side of your brain while you relive the experience, which was just awful. So I know I'm going into my therapy once a week, and we're going to talk about, so what happened, Scott? You woke up, you went and did this, you went and did that, you did this, and then what were you thinking at that time? And instead of the sequence events on the superficially would suggest, oh, Scott, you were negligent, it's your fault they died, right? It wasn't. Actually, I did everything I possibly could to keep them comfortable. It was just a bizarre, totally bizarre sequence of events. But I had to go through and reevaluate that event from that outside perspective. And I did that. And I mean, I would get like 2 days before, like it's leg day and you're thinking about the night before.
Yeah, you get anxiety, of course. Yeah.
I was getting anxiety like 5 days before these things because they were so bad. I'd be sitting in the waiting room just crying. Like, holy shit, we got to go through this again. But I had to do that because I was agoraphobic for like a year. I couldn't leave the house. I was pretty screwed up.
Oh, wow.
And so, but what I had to do was reprocess it and rethink that. So when you're going into the gym and you're doing like anti-therapy, you can be, depending on the person, right? Because you're thinking about that ex-girlfriend, or you're thinking about, the boss or your family of origin, something that happened when you're a kid, your dad who left you, or it could be a million things. And all you're doing is you can be just entrenching that, I think.
Yeah. So the weird thing for me was that I never really thought about a particular moment in my life, but I tapped into the anger. Like it was always in the back of my head. Yeah. And I would just tap into the raw aggression. I have videos about this on my YouTube channel from 2 or 3 years ago, where I tell people how to train with anger and just, be Bruce Banner the other 23 hours during the day. And then 1 hour of the day, you release a Hulk. And this was like therapy for me at the time, but I was seriously reinforcing that anger every workout 5 times a week, just to linger around. And it wasn't until I came off cycle for a long time and started experimenting with these neuropeptides that I was able to finally let go. And I think I give myself some therapy when I traveled through Asia for a year. You know, during the day, you have all these new impressions, you see cool stuff, you see a new temple and a new mountain and all these cultural changes. So you think about this during the day, right? When you travel with a night bus, and then you have some, good memories to think about. And then slowly over time, after about 2 or 3 months, you go backwards in time. So 3 months into the trip, you start thinking about university. And then about 15, 16 years old, right? So I think at the 6th month, I was crying every night bus, just thinking about childhood trauma and that kind of stuff. So I processed everything and put it away, right? In a positive sense, that chapter was finally closed. I would allow myself finally to think about it like 10 years later, 12 years later. Yeah. But the anger still remained, the raw emotion of the anger remained. And it wasn't until like the last 2 years that I was able to finally process that with neurotropic peptides. The problem is that I don't think I'll ever be able to train as hard as I used to, because that's what I use as fuel. Of course, I also decided to take it easy on 2 gram cycles and stuff. I'm sure that helped also. I'm sure that helped. But a lot of people in the comment section can relate to this because they're still training like that, and then you might need some actual therapy, whether that's self therapy or with the, what is it, EMDR?
EMDR is what, they'll either use they can use a light post that sends a light back and forth, or they use sounds. You wear headphones and it goes beep, beep, beep. And the idea is that, you need to sort of synchronize the activity in both hemispheres of your brain. It's kind of a generalized idea. That's one of the main premises of this. But the main thing I really think is that you go back and you relive those experiences. And you have to be guided with a therapist to do this, or someone who can have a third person perspective. So you don't go in the gym and relive them and then make yourself angry again, right? That's reinforcing it. You go through and say, okay, so your dad walked out on you, right? And how'd that make you feel? You're like, I feel like I was worthless, like he hated me, like I had no value in the world, or what have you. You say honestly, and he said, but now looking at this, some of this is kind of like reparenting too. It's like, well, was that the truth? And did your dad really think that? It's like, no, he was drunk, he was in pain, because so you rethink it, in sort of a logical sense, and then you can relive because every time we have, like, literally physiologically, neurologically, we have a memory, we have to reconstruct it. There's prion proteins in the neurons get broken down, and the connections are reformed every time you have a memory. So, like, the older I get, the better I was, right? You keep telling the story and keep on getting better. That's true too of your memory. So, like, you have selective memories of certain things. You remember certain things because they were salient for whatever reason, and then you kind of forget the good things or forget the bad things. And so you can reformulate your memories, and to some degree, you can reformulate. You're literally reformulating your past. You could. True. You really are recreating who you are. If you're very careful and meticulous about how you cultivate those memories and those experiences. If you want to go in the gym and then be the Hulk, you're going to have that Hulk bubbling to bubble to the surface. Right. Or you can just say, I don't need the Hulk. Hulk doesn't serve me anymore. Yeah.
So that's where I am now, finally, at life. So I'm a lot more at peace than I used to be. And it's good. It's good. But on the opposite end, I don't think I can be as good of a bodybuilder, because, the training hard, training the failure and beyond that, and doing all these crazy sets with short rest times, I don't think I'm mentally capable of it, because I always use that aggression. And now I'm a lot more deliberative, a lot slower tempo, a lot more structured with my workout. But back then it was just pure rage. Yeah. And I love to train like that. Yeah. I got myself pretty big and hard and dense doing that kind of stuff, Yeah. Luckily some of the muscle memory, and it's now still there. So even off cycle, the quality of the muscle is somewhat sustained, because I went through hell and back to get it.
Do you see? This is just probably luck, maybe because I started training when I was so young, or in different scenarios. But I have, like, different modes. So I've done the pure rage thing, where there's just like I'm just trying to destroy myself or trying to destroy the image or whatever. But I also have, like, I kind of call it Ronnie Coleman mode. You know how, like, Ronnie stands in the gym doing this shit, he's got like 9 plates on the hack squat. It's like, yeah, buddy, how you do that? Lightweight, that how? That kind of stuff. And like, I do that in the gym. I hoot and holler and have so much fun, and I can train really hard that way. Really hard that way.
That's true. That's true. Do you bounce every rep during that time as well, or still a little bit more deliberate?
I always have had the tendency when, because I've been for many years logbook focused, I have to really watch out for starting to get sloppy at the end. And now what I do is I've actually learned to slow my reps near the end. And that seems to help a good bit.
Helps a lot.
Yeah.
Focusing on the time under tension and trying to keep the first rep the same as the last rep, but use less of an explosive movement towards the end.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it saves a lot of injuries. I mean, you've had your fair share of injuries, right? And I've had my fair share.
Lot.
Yeah. Right. And then, of course, the older you get, the more deliberate and careful you got to train. But I think it's also a little bit hard to unlearn because it's so instilled of us. I mean, I got the Dorian Yates VHS, Blood and Guts. Taped over like 5 times, so you have all those scan lines and stuff, right? So half of the time you don't even know what you're looking at; you just hear grunting.
Yeah,
I got this VHS when I was 15.
Oh wow,
15! Yeah. I started going to the gym, and then somebody at my Albert Heijn, which is like a grocery store that I used to work at, he was 17 or 18. He's like, "Watch this! If you're just starting to train," and then I was like, "Okay, I got to train like this." And some of the bigger guys were training like that at the gym also, probably because I watched the VHS tape as well. And then you don't know what is, another way to train, because that's how everybody used to train in the 90s, because that's when I started. Yeah.
Some people were not actually, Dorian was kind of like, he was doing things different. A lot of people were still training with high volume back then. A lot of guys still were.
So Dorian was doing high intensity. Yeah. So I would do like high intensity, drug free, high intensity training, just going to failure and beyond, and having 2 spotters, and then all this stuff. And and we would just copy what was being done in the video, because there was no article explaining it.
No.
And there was no website explaining it. I mean, we weren't really surrounded by bodybuilders, only meatheads. And then occasionally you have one real bodybuilder that did it professionally. And they would just laugh at you like, we just do Weider principles, high volume, take a little bit of steroids, and you'll be okay. Of course, it's not great guidance either.
No. Yeah. But you were forced to sort of figure something out on your own. You had this the totally different situation. I always try to think, like, what would I have become if I were born, 30 years later, if I were 23, 22.
I think it's much tougher for the kids. It's information oversaturation, and everybody gets paralysis by analysis. They don't know who to follow. They don't know what to believe. Everything is AI nowadays. And they're like, are these people that we listen to even real? This is just ChatGPT trying to talk to me. CGI. That's what these kids are thinking about now. It's hilarious. Yeah, I think we were
Virtual
lucky
Steve or Vigorous Steve? Who is this?
Exactly. Yeah, it's it must be tough for them just to see all these young kids in their age bracket just exceed and explode on social media and making millions of dollars.
Back to your question, like, let's say you're someone who wants to go to the dark side, and they're in this position. Aside from going to your site and listening to all your videos 2 or 3 times, reading your articles, that sort of thing, I would also say look at your family history if you possibly can. Some people are adopted; they don't know, but see what happens. You have a family history of prostate cancer. I do, for instance. My dad had cancer. Prostate, we don't know exactly what got it. It was the chemo that got him, actually, but he had prostate cancer. So that's something I've paid attention to. Where's your family history at? What things you're likely to come down with, possibly. And then here's the thing. Basically assume that everyone you see on social media is on gear, right? And that they have good genetics. Unless like their niche is to say, I don't have good genetics. Sometimes that could be kind of a thing. There's a psychological twist that you can hook people with that, I think, too.
It's most of the educators don't have good genetics. That's why we don't know so much.
Yeah,
we have to learn. We have to learn the hard way just to attain a little bit of muscle tissue. And it's, I think, if you look at most of the educators, it's not about our physique. It's about training hard and sharing knowledge and preventing people from making the same mistakes. Because I made plenty of mistakes trying to get super big, when in reality my body doesn't want to be super big. It just wants to be 100 kilos, 225 pounds. That's sustainable, but anything over that is just Yeah, it's still pretty big. Yeah. That's what the people told me when I went to the Mr. Olympia. Steve, you're much bigger than we thought you would be. I said, well, I have been training for 25
Right,
years.
right. But
So,
in accordance with that is that like the first year is it's gonna tell you what your genetics are. You're gonna know whether you're gonna be someone who it would ever make sense to do the gear, and so consider that like your genetics are more than likely they're somewhere around average. If you're like what was this guy's name? Brad Castleberry. Remember Brad Castleberry?
oh yeah,
Another
but
guy,
he
I
would
think
just lift with fake weights, right?
yeah, I think he was accused of that, but Dante Trudell knew him personally. So he used to
really?
see
Okay.
they're from the same area of Florida. I mean, of California. And he talked to him a couple times, and the guy was legitimately strong. But the interesting thing about Brad is you look at some, especially his earlier videos, he had training partners. They were just totally normal kids. Like he's bench pressing 5 plates, and they're looking, to get 185 for just as many reps.
Yeah.
So he was the quintessential example of the guy with just tremendous genetics, obviously probably using some stuff. He just blasted past everybody. So realize that's who you are, that you're probably going to be Brad's training partner. You're not going to be Brad. Chances it's very, very likely.
But this happens with a lot of guys on social media, right? The entire group of bros, right, gym buddies, they all decide to go on PEDs, and one of those guys, like 1 in 100, he will go somewhere doing everything wrong, but his genetic response is so great that on social media it blows up because he looks good, and he just stays leaner than everybody else. He's stronger than everybody else. And with the limited information that they have, they just get popular super fast, especially now that everybody's marketing themselves on social media. And those guys just exceeded everything. And then when they start doing it right, they turn pro. And then when they get with a real good coach, then they get, the top of the Mr. Olympia or the 212 or the whatever, right? The classic physique Olympia. Because, you see what Chris Bumstead, even the last 2 years under Haney Rambout's guidance, stellar improvement.
Yeah.
But he's also one of those kids, when he first started touching something, he would just explode and look better than everybody else. He already looked better than everybody else not taking anything.
I know.
And that's why he's, one of the, I think he's, Chris Bumstead is one of the figures, the forefront figures of the fitness industry now. 18 million followers.
Yeah. He has 18 million now. Yeah. He's the man, right? Everyone wants to be Chris, right?
Everybody wants to be Chris, and everybody wants to be with Chris.
I'm glad he's a smart guy.
With Chris.
I'm glad he's a smart guy. Yeah, seems like he's a good dude. But not everyone's gonna be him. You just gotta kind of realize that.
But they all want to be him. Yeah, they all want to be him, and they all want to take something at 18 years old, and they get the supplement contract and be Mr. Classic Physique. Yeah, that's what's so hard to drill into these kids. Like, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, even Urs Kelsinski and Wesley Vissers and Ramon Dino, they're close, but they're not there yet. And that's already the most elite of the elite.
Yeah. The way I kind of frame, I grew up kind of in a small town, like 35,000. And everybody knew everybody. And there were a couple kids that everyone kind of knew were on gear in high school. One guy was big. He literally was only like 200 pounds, but he just looked like he was just like crazy big.
Right. And at that time, your perception of what's really big is a lot smaller.
Right.
Until you meet the pros and you're like, oh, that's big.
Yeah. There's a whole other world. That's the thing I think a lot of times is people have never, there are people that are sort of stepping forward as like they're being vets online. This was true in the muscle days of the bodybuilding boards, the bulletin boards, and I think true of Instagram, who don't even go to shows, who haven't even been to shows. They don't know what pros look like. They're some of not the coaches, but there are lots of guys, that just talk. They don't go to the shows. They don't really know what it's like to work with, see some of these big guys and to know what kind of genetic response they have. But my thought is that our brains are they're not really, evolutionarily speaking, we're not really wired to have the perspective of what really is going on. The world is so small. So normally if it would make sense, like if you got a bunch of people, like let's say you're in a tribe, a group of people, and everyone's going to have pretty similar genetics. There's going to be some variability. So if you do what your older brother's best friend does, chances are you could get something like close to what he got out of whatever he's doing. But nowadays, the variability amongst human beings is all over the place. That's not true at all. You may not have anywhere near the ability to grow and become like that person. But your brain can't tease apart what you're seeing on Instagram, because that's telling your brain, I think unconsciously, what the normal world is like, and it's not. It's cream of the crop. Not even close.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I realized this recently. Even like I've been off cycle for 6 months, 7 months, and then you look in the mirror, you're not happy with your body composition or your muscularity. Just you look in the mirror, you're like, ugh, this sucks.
Yeah.
I don't even want to stand in front of the mirror. I went to the swimming park with my wife. And my wife's been retired for 5 years, so she's a little bit, not as muscular, not as lean as she used to be, right? So she's enjoying her retirement, and I'm off everything for a long time. And we go to the water park, and we're the best looking couple there.
Superstars, yeah.
Superstars. People want to take pictures with me, and I'm like, dude, I'm just like the worst shape I've had in years. Why would you want to take pictures?
It's gonna get out on the internet too. You're like, shit. Like,
I can't have this. Like, everybody will unfollow me. But then when you realize you go into general population, or even just in most gyms, you're still one of the biggest dudes, even when you feel the most horrible. And I think as you get older, you start to realize that it is okay to be a little bit softer and off cycle and not as strong and, maybe not as apparent on social media physically. But when you're younger, I mean, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. Being, the biggest and the best looking guy, at every party, basically, or wherever you go. And you love the attention that comes along with that, of course. I think it's very hard to be a kid nowadays. A lot of pressure, a lot of stuff that we didn't have to deal with. We have the camaraderie in the gyms. I feel that some of that camaraderie is lost now, traveling around. And even though when I went to Mr. Olympia and I went to Flex Lewis's gym and some of the other gyms there, and then some of the gyms in LA, everybody's very excited in the fitness industry, but that's also around Olympia time. So I'm not exactly sure if that's a right representation of what it is the rest of the year, when not everybody's flying in and not everybody's excited about the Olympia, not everybody's in shape and looking good, because let's be honest, everybody prepares for the Olympia to a certain extent. Like, I want to be in shape for the Mr. Olympia too.
Right. Yeah.
I've been meeting a lot of people that watch the YouTube channel, so that's why.
Of course. Yeah. You can't get out-angled by anybody, right?
I'm sure this year I'll get out-angled, especially by Chase Irons. He's been on that mega cycle.
Yeah.
And Paul Burnett and then everybody else that's coming, it doesn't really matter to me anyway. I know I'm doing it for a higher purpose. Right. But still, you want to be lean and have some shreds going on.
Yeah. So for those young people who are listening, like you're when you dig into those locks with all those different keys, you're opening up all sorts of things you don't know about that are literally could completely change your life in a way that you don't necessarily want to. The thing that's kind of ironic about it is that I think to some degree the people who do enhanced bodybuilding and just bodybuilders in general, they're control freaks, right?
No, yeah. OCD is the key success story for bodybuilding, because you have to be repetitive.
Absolutely.
Don't miss injections, don't miss meals, don't miss cardio, don't miss workouts, don't miss supplements, right? You have to be OCD to make it work.
But to some degree, when you take that step and you go there, especially if you're young, you are going to be giving up. That's the deal you make with the devil, so to speak. You're going to be giving up control, because your brain could be changing. You're going to change your perception. You're going to have a dependence, what have you. You don't know. You really don't know. It's like here's the contract. It's like, it's like when you get an image on Instagram and it's all blurred out. You know what's in there? Just sign this. It's like, I can't even read it. I don't know what's in there. Right? Should I sign this?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, you sign before you know, right?
It's sign before you know, and that's the curious thing. Well, what if this does make me into Chris Bumstead? Huh?
Yeah.
I think that we were going to talk about all these anabolic pathways that they all overlap to some degree in very basic ways. We're trying to turn on protein synthesis. We're trying to inhibit protein breakdown. We got to have some satellite cells involved. There has to be some coordination here in the muscle cells. We have to have a training stimulus in place. There has to be an excess of calories, enough calories to drive and allow the adaptation to change the energy status of the cells. And you can do all of that stuff with natural training and know what kind of machinery you got. Before opening, you can sort of take a peek behind the locks and see what's available there before you start sticking all the keys in there and opening up the Pandora's boxes.
True. Very, very true. I mean, do you know Alberto Nunez and the 3D Muscle Journey guys? I mean, the results that they get with their natural athletes is absolutely phenomenal. One of their 10-year clients is actually training at the Muscle Factory here. So I see him. He's drug-free. And he looks bigger than most guys on social media, but he's not that present because he's just doing his thing, doing his natural bodybuilding, training his clients, right? Going to the gym and following the diet. He looks stellar, shredded glutes, everything. He's got the whole shebang, even though the weak body parts are a little bit weak during the diet, and the strong body parts remain strong because, again, there's not so much anabolic signaling, on his endogenous testosterone production taking place.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, I'm surprised. Like back then, it was unheard of that you could look like that, natural, right, without PEDs in the picture. But now you see, real drug-free athletes that compete in drug-tested shows, and they're not under my guidance to beat the drug test. Right? Because I've helped many at the World Championships level, but that's a tested show. That's not a drug-free show. But I'm talking about real NBF, World Natural Bodybuilding Federation. Like those I would consider just besides the drug testing that they do, just from a honor system that they compete there. I would say that all those guys are drug-free, or at least a large majority. And what you see is possible. It's absolutely stellar. Those guys maximize everything. And I think if some of the enhanced bodybuilders listen to what those guys have to say, that would be so much more ahead regarding nutrition and the training structure. And because again, there's a lot of educators on this platform that give training advice or nutrition advice, but it's only valid for enhanced bodybuilders.
Yeah, there's only some things. I know what you mean.
Right, train failure and this and that, and drop sets and supersets, and even if you leave some reps in reserves, the amount of volume that they advocate only for enhanced lifters. Like when you see the volume of natural lifters and the frequency, it's like 4 exercises, two sets, 1 working. You're like, how? This doesn't look like fun at all.
Right.
As an enhanced lifter. It's so funny how it has evolved over the last few years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things we can learn from, but most of us, we don't really dive into the natural bodybuilding because we have steroids to compensate for the lack of effort that we put into the gym.
Yeah, you're missing out on that opportunity. It's a path you can't go back to. Just you can actually, but most people won't. You almost like you're not going to be able to go back and go through that learning process again. You can, and that's I think what some of your TRT people are coming back into, but they're a minority. But you miss out on that, so you end up being someone who doesn't know what those natural competitors did learn. And I think like Jose Raymond's a good example. I think of someone who he earned his pro card multiple times, and then he went from weighing like 155, 160, maybe less than 170 on stage to 212.
250. Yeah. On stage, but he was 250 in the offseason.
Yeah. He had to fight to get down to 212. And he started bodybuilding at a very young age. So those sorts of things you miss out on. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, and then when you look at him now, he's still got a respectable physique. He's trying to get his wife pregnant, I think. I talked with him at the Mr. Olympia at the Flex Lewis's after party, and he was trying. So I really hope that and otherwise I'll have to talk with him again this year because my protocol is working very well.
Oh, good. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, my fertility parameters are off the scale, so we already started trying. But of course, I don't expect to get my wife pregnant at 40 years old in one go.
Right.
So, it would be good, though.
Yeah.
We've been just abstaining until my fertility parameters were great, and now we've been actively trying, but still waiting on the period or the positive pregnancy test, either or, and then we just keep trying.
I have faith.
But this is an issue with a lot of bodybuilders after a decade, 20 years of steroid use. The fertility is just, and that's what kids really don't realize, and I didn't realize this either. Like I made a list of all the prerequisites before you start doing your first cycle, right? Organ imaging, CT scan, and MRI, just as a precaution to see if there's any plaque buildup or structural issues with your heart, because once that fails, it's over. Right? The liver will regenerate. The kidney, you can kind of heal slightly with lowering the inflammation, but the heart, blood clots, genetic analysis, looking into your family history, checking the cancer markers, or doing a full body MRI to determine if there's any cancer in the beginning, doing a semen analysis. And then freezing some of that semen, and maybe doing HCG monotherapy to see what your testicular potential is before you even start downregulating your HPTA. Just see if your testicles are non-responsive to luteinizing hormone or follicle-stimulating hormone. And if it does work, then at least you know that PCT will be successful. Because some guys don't respond to that.
Yeah.
And they might need to be on TRT for life. And whatever sperm they have now, better freeze it, multiple samples, because their PCT will not be successful and their spermatogenesis will not come back. It was already terrible, right? Maybe due to a varicocele or something else. And if they go on cycle and a decade later, I want to have kids, I'm going to do the fertility protocol, but nothing happens. That I've had those consultations also after 2 years of trying. Nothing happens. They don't have a baseline test. And of course, I wish I did the same thing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but I didn't because nobody was talking about it. People was just talking about tests and D-ball cycles, D-ball kickstarts on steroid.com.
Right. You're not going to hear people talking about this stuff very often because those people won't typically, and this is why, so I'm always torn about talking about drugs and getting in the sphere of talking about drugs. Because I kind of become like, oh, he's kind of a party pooper, right? Like, why he's talking about all this stuff I shouldn't do.
But most of us are party poopers. It's same as on my YouTube channel. I'm a party pooper for many guys as well. They're like, Steve, get to the fucking point.
Right.
But like I just released a video about erythropoietin, EPO, which I have no experience with, but people ask about it. So I made a video about epoietin alpha, beta, zeta, darbepoietin, Mircera, and melanotan-2, which can also increase hematocrit levels, right? Very in-depth, 30-minute video, 15 minutes disclaimers. And I already saw in the comment section, like, Steve, why do we need to do an MRI? And why do we need to do a CT scan? And why do we need to check our clotting risks, the fibrinogen and plasma thrombin time and all that stuff? I just want to get to the EPO part. Well, there are timestamps, but I want to make you aware of the risks and what you need to do. And that's why my YouTube channel doesn't grow as fast as some of these other platforms. Because my videos are long, because I want to make sure that everything of relevance is in every single video. Because even though I might have mentioned it in previous videos, it doesn't mean that this person that's going to watch the video that is being released now has access to that information because they've been subscribed for 2 years. And that makes it a little bit hard for educators like us. Like, I would love to give you a blanket cycle, but we can't. We can only inspire you to learn more.
No. This isn't like you have a headache and you say, okay, well, take 200 milligrams of naproxen and you should be good to go.
Even then, the amount of prerequisites to come along with that.
Right. There's almost nothing. That's why, I mean, I tell almost on a daily basis, I tell people when I get messaged on Instagram, I said, the first thing I'm going to say is don't take medical advice from anyone on social media. No doctor's going to do it for you. And I won't do it because I can't possibly know what your risk factors could be. It would be totally irresponsible of me to do that. Yeah. But all those disclaimers, they have to be in place, especially when it comes to fertility. That's one of the first things that I kind of ask people. We did a podcast a couple of years ago now with a client of mine, and we did the Power PCT, the program of wellness restoration. Right. It worked really well for him. And now he's got a baby girl and he's very happy. I just heard from another guy who heard that podcast and he's kind of going to have another child and it worked for him. But once, and now he's going to try to do it again. But the thing is, it's like when you're 15, you're not thinking about any of those things.
No. No, you're thinking about potential for impregnation, but not the actual process afterwards.
Right. You're thinking, this is going to be birth control. I'm going to use some extra Deca, so whatever the best for birth control is, I'll use that one.
Yeah. Just thinking about having the sex, but not about the consequences afterwards.
Yeah.
You're just thinking about hooking up with girls. No, it's, I mean, I didn't think about it either. I thought, you read the message boards and like, everybody's having girls. Okay, I'll settle for that. But then when the time is there, you realize like, I might have done some damage. Luckily for me, I was able to restore my fertility parameters. Well, I'm not sure what my baseline is, but my fertility parameters are phenomenal. That being said, my fertility protocol was extensive and I sacrificed everything to get the best fertility possible. I took it as a contest prep, basically. Right? So everything that I needed to do to get my fertility up, right? Icing my nuts for increased blood flow, yes. No scientific evidence to support it, but it does work.
Icing for increased blood flow.
Yeah. So it's basically like hot cold therapy you would use in your knee. Right? So you reduce the inflammation.
Yeah.
you reduce because the blood vessels to the testicles are vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you reduce the temperature and then increase the blood flow afterwards to heat up the temperature of the testicles again to its ideal temperature, then you include some nutrients. So if you time this around meals containing a lot of nutrients like taurine and carnitine and zinc, selenium, right? All these nutrients that help with spermatogenesis, then potentially on paper, you would say that you have increased blood flow, basically like pumping up a muscle. So I've been doing this for months now. And I think this is one of the reasons why my fertility is so good, besides the antioxidants, besides the recombinant FSH and the AT. I do it all, right? Yeah. Whether there's scientific evidence for it or not, or just pure bro science. Well, I mean, 500 million per semen, per ejaculate.
Wow.
With good morphology and good motility. Yeah, it's insane.
That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So so I've been helping people on this journey, and now I just started adding in the growth hormone because again I felt a little bit small, and I went through all the scientific literature, and at least in cases of growth hormone deficiency, there's some potential for spermatogenesis. So let's see over the next 40 to 90 days if my fertility parameters will improve further. Maybe I'll have like 700 million. With even better mortality and better morphology. And then, it took months to piece together because, again, I've used various protovcols, but I always like to get my hands dirty and then use the scientific literature with my own anecdotal experience. And of course, I've been doing fertility consultations for years now. And you take some of that anecdotal evidence, and I think at one point I'll have a protocol that is valid for most bodybuilders that used steroids for a decade. And then everybody can have beautiful children.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, if you look at the bro science or whatever it may be, you think, okay, what's the possible harm that could come from this? What's, as long as you're not like, putting liquid nitrogen on your gonads, right? Then you're not going to, right? You're not doing anything like outrageous. They're getting down a bit, right? So some of those things are working for you and some of them aren't, but you're doing everything you possibly could, and as long as there's no interference for them or negative effects, then that makes sense to do that. It certainly does.
Exactly. Yeah. So I see some people, they don't have a positive outcome of some of these practices, like whether that's HCG, the glutathione, the recombinant HCG, or icing testicles with ice pack. And again, it's no direct contact. You wrap it in a towel just to kind of cool the temperature down. The same thing you would do with an ice pack on your knee, right? There's no direct contact. You just cool the area to reduce the inflammation and increase blood flow when it starts heating up. And you can do some red light therapy at the same time, right? Alternating between a cold pack and a red light therapy. People want to try this. They try it for 3 months and nothing happens. But they need to do a testicular ultrasound to kind of determine if they have a varicocele or a hydrocele or other like necrotic tissue in the testicles. That's also common with people who use boatloads of steroids because it's just completely downregulated and the varicocele is present and the blood flow is obstructed tremendously. So again, you need to do everything, which I always like bodybuilding because it's so all-inclusive. Like if you do everything right and you use low dosages of a couple of different things and you do the diet correctly and the supplementation correctly, you can accomplish a lot. But you also need the OCD tendencies to put it all into practice because it's so inclusive that, it's hard to do anything else. Yeah. It's hard to do anything. Like, can you imagine yourself working a real full-time job if you weren't doing consultations and helping people and coaching and with all the stuff?
I mean, I was a college professor for a couple of years, so I did kind of a real full-time job.
Okay. That's a real job. Yeah, that's a real job.
That's a real job, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's a real job.
This is, I think, where I can help the most people, though. There was just kind of too constrained. And I worked jobs growing up, so yeah, I could do it. But I just kind of decided, I mean, I owned a gym for a while. I had a gym for like 4 years. Well,
oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. But I wasn't doing my best service for people in that case. Because I was busy, like at one point, we're trying to build things. I was going around like putting flyers on people's windows on their cars and that kind of stuff. And that's
wasn't that successful, huh?
Yeah, it was a bad time. It was about 2008. Is we were right when
that's the economic crisis. Yeah, everybody threw in the towel,
right? Yeah. So that was part of it. That's about when I closed the gym. But long story, but I ended up having to, just to make things work. I was actually the academic dean of the acupuncture school where I went to school. And I had an acupuncture practice, and I was like doing talks at my gym and trying to build that up. But then my business part was gone, and then I had to give up my deanship. I had to give up my acupuncture practice so that I could just keep the gym afloat. And I'm like, okay, but I was doing it. But anyway, decided this is this is the right spot for me, doing what I'm doing, not doing the regular 9 to 5, because this is where I can interact and help the most people. That's
right. Absolutely. I mean, that's the fun of being an educator. You learn so much new stuff, and then you try to communicate that to a larger audience.
Yeah.
And that's how most people in the fitness industry benefit. And I get inspired by your material. And of course, you're reaching so many of the hardcore bodybuilders, because all the hardcore bodybuilders know about you. I think it's the new audience. Yeah, of course, everybody knows who you are. But maybe people outside of the fitness industry, the TRT crowd, the new kids on the block, right? They're just getting started. They're like, who's Dr. Scott Stevenson? But now they know.
Yeah.
Today they know.
Yeah. I'm expecting an influx of drug questions here. Thanks to you.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay.
Guys, Scott doesn't do the drug test questions, but go to Tanner Tatert, who's also is a new guy on the block, also an educator, but he's like 23 years old.
Okay.
And he's helping kind of digest all of our material, like your material and my material, to the younger crowd, just to prevent them from making mistakes. Because the younger kids, they don't listen to guys over 30.
I know.
Like, what does this old guy know? Old timer. But
right.
Disgusting, yeah. But Tanner is like 23 years old, so he's kind of helping with this new generation. He's doing a great job.
I'm glad to hear that, yeah.
Yeah. So we're slowly handing off the material to the younger kids so we can retire. But we will never retire, of course, because there's still so much to learn.
I saw a little bit of the YouTube video with him. I don't know if you got to this question up, but is he running up against difficulty trying to kind of talk with young kids and sway them away from making bad decisions? He seemed like he had it pretty straight.
Yeah. Everybody's stuck in their ways, and I was the same when I was younger, so I completely get it. Sometimes you just got to learn the hard way. Sometimes you got to get your hands dirty and get burnt, right? Until you learn. And I think we all go through this process. And after a couple of times you burn your hands, then you realize, maybe these guys are onto something. Maybe they are preventing me from making the mistakes that they made. Of course, he's getting through to some people. And I realized this when I went to the Mr. Olympia. Some guys that are following my YouTube channel for 5 years, they started at 15 years old and now they're 20. And then they still didn't touch anything. But their bodybuilding improved. No, that's a lifesaver. Yeah, and I talked with Noel Diesel, who has the same thing, right? Because he's open about his own steroid use, but he doesn't go into dosages and also explains the potential risks. This is why he doesn't want to go into really steroid education, and he has millions of followers. And you see these kids, and they thank him publicly for like, we understand that drugs are involved, but we're not ready yet. And it's a very mature response. And they don't feel ready yet. And I didn't feel ready yet when I was 22, when I realized that everybody was on steroids, whether those are classmates or people at the gym, and of course the bodybuilders. I mean, I met Jay Cutler when I was 23. After he won the Mr. Olympia in 2006, he came to Holland. There was a new Dutch Grand Prix, and Hidetani Yamagishi was there, and Jay Cutler, and Ronnie Coleman, right, who plays second, who allegedly should have been first at that show because he looked 10 times better than the Mr. Olympia where he lost. There was a very big African-American and Antillean and the Dominican crowd there. So they were all cheering for Ron. They were going nuts. It was a great show. Anyway, so I met Jay Cutler at a convention and I shook his hand and I realized, like, wait a minute. This bodybuilding thing might not play out for me if this is what is required.
Just the size of his hand, or just the size
my
of
hand my hand disappeared in his. Yeah. And he was super nice, super cordial. He answered all of our questions. He was one of the best experiences I had with an IFBB pro, because I didn't have so much experience at the time living in Holland. There's only 2 or 3 IFBB pros. But I did realize, like, man, this is next level stuff.
Yeah.
This is next level stuff. So to come back, like, I realized that I wouldn't be able to make it that far at that time because of how far that was away from me, right? I was 23 at the time. I should have started 5 years earlier with PEDs. Like, I mean, Jay allegedly started at 18 for his first show. So I knew there was already a huge gap. And since we didn't have classic physique or men's physique, I was like, okay, forget it. Forget it. I'm going to learn as much as I can, but I'm going to wait until I feel that I need it. So when I was 26, I felt that I needed it. I thought I reached my natural potential, which if I look at the 3D Muscle Journey team, I'm sure I could have put on another 5 to 10 pounds of actual muscle if I did it right with the knowledge we have nowadays.
Yeah.
And so I meet a lot of kids, and Tanner meets a lot of these kids that abstain. But for each guy that abstains, I think there's another 5 that
at least
dabble.
Yeah.
So we're doing our best. But I'm sure we'll meet those guys later on, and they'll say, yeah, you were right, Steve. Yeah, you were right, Dr. Scott. Should have waited a little bit longer to open those locks.
I hope we do meet them, because if we don't meet them, that would be kind of the worst circumstance. That means they dropped off the face of the body.
Yeah.
And they're not doing that anymore. They're gone. They vanished. And there's someone who maybe isn't able to, make their life better by still training and being fit at least.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You never know, right? If you don't meet them, you don't hear about it. This is the weird thing about the fitness industry. We only hear about the things, the people that are still involved. Mm-hmm. And then if they were IFBB pros and they passed away, like Gustavo Buttel, for example, he passed away recently from, I'm not even sure what it was. He had an aneurysm when he was actually still competing.
Okay.
Right, from a leg press, I believe. And that's why he started wearing glasses and his legs came down in size because he was scared. Again, that's just through the grapevine. Okay. But he died recently, right? So this is what we still hear about. But what about all the guys that die from complications due to steroid use, competing, etc., or bodybuilding in general, that are not known? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm. We don't have any.
All the guys that used to dabble. Yeah, we don't know. Like all the guys that used to dabble when they were like 30, 40, maybe into their 50s, and then now they're 70, and they pass away from cardiovascular complications or other issues related to steroid use 20 years, 30 years later, but we don't hear about it because they're not known. I think those numbers are alarming.
Yeah. Have you watched or followed Cali Muscle?
Yeah, I mean, he's falling apart mentally and physically.
But he's being open about it. Like he's talking about it. I think I saw the algorithm started sending him to me now and again. So I kind of see I click on one thing.
What are you doing to me?
I know, right? Now he's like, you think he's eating all watermelon? That's the last thing I saw. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And he's still like, he's kind of goofy and has fun and he's still enjoying life, but I've heard him talk. He's totally honest and open about what he's doing. He's someone we're kind of watching him kind of fall apart, and he was, gigantic, massive dude. And he's being absolutely, utterly honest about quote unquote mistakes he did, things he did, what he wouldn't have done. But he doesn't look that bad physically.
No, he doesn't look that bad. He looks lean.
Yeah.
Still muscular, but of course it's the GAC repeaters that are maybe a little bit more in his favor. Right?
He was genetically gifted before. Like he was bench pressing 500 pounds before he started anything. So think about that. Right. If you want to you think you're looking like Cali Muscle, you're going to get to have a 500 pound bench press natural.
Yeah.
And then
exactly.
Yeah. So
and then start dabbling a little bit to bring it back about fasting. I mean, I'm fasting myself this week, 5 days, 5.5 days, kind of shut off mTOR and clean out my intestinal tract. I do it every 3 months.
But 5 days straight fast.
Full fasting. This is day 3. We're now, it's 24, 48, almost 72 hours in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm one of those few bodybuilders that actually fast regularly after watching some material from Dr. Jason Fung. I can highly recommend it. It keeps you young, keeps your intestinal tract healthy, and because we're eating the same food every day, and I take a deload at the same time, so I kind of reset the clock, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm not against fasting in any way, shape, or form, even though watermelon fasting isn't really fasting.
No, I don't.
But you can. But as you can see from the last, as you can see from the last 2 hours, I'm still energetic and excited and cognitive. I'm sure I'm in a deep state of ketosis, so that helps.
Right.
But this is something I can recommend to everybody. Shut off mTOR for a bit. Mm-hmm. Even though everybody's like, no, I got to eat my protein and I got to have my steroids. And but I think honestly, this is one of the reasons for my success and still looking somewhat youthful. Just coming off and doing fasts and doing basically the entire opposite of what we usually recommend in bodybuilding or fitness in general. Just take a step back and do a complete 180 for a week. And then continue on the same path. It's not that difficult.
I think I did the longest ever did. This was many moons ago. This was in 2007 or so. We did a 9-day fast.
Oh wow!
And that's brutal. I had 2 salads. A friend was kind of guiding me through this week. She said, you should have a salad today. But that was basically it.
For to prevent enterohepatic recirculation. Yeah.
I think
I do the same thing. I have 2 salads just to kind of excrete the bile acids.
Yeah,
and to clean out the intestinal tract. Yeah.
And at that time, I think I've been competing for 8 years or so, and I just basically stepped back. I started at one point. I was eating 95% raw food, completely sort of intuitively, basically.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I felt awesome. I felt great. And the reason I bring this up, not that everyone needs to do this to feel great, is that I was concerned. I'm like, oh shit, like I'm going to freak out because I'm going to lose all this size, and I'm not, and I'm going to my identity is just crumble before my eyes, and I'm going to like find out I'm like a total steroid addict, right? And many people become dependent. Many people couldn't do that, and I was happy to see that was probably one of the things that was most important about doing that. All the other things that I learned along the way was taking that step back and recognize, like, you know what? Okay, I think I'm all right. I have some idea. I can be almost in that third person perspective that you can't be in once you're taking that stuff. You can't rightfully judge the decisions that you're making if the decisions are being if you're drunk on steroids, basically, to some degree.
Exactly.
Right. So
it's funny how taking a step back like that can really put things into perspective. And then when you do go back to the gym, you start training, you realize you barely lost any strength. You lost some fullness, really, obviously, some pump. Yeah, I say strong also, whether I'm fasting off steroids or on steroids. I mean, I do it every month for, the last 6 years, like 2017, I've been doing fast quarterly. And it's the results are always the same. Okay, you lose intestinal mass, you lose a lot of weight on the scale, you lose some body fat, then the water retention comes down and you look a lot more streamlined and youthful. And then as a result of that, you feel so accomplished because you did something the entire opposite. And your bodybuilding didn't suffer in any way, shape, or form because the fullness will come back and the strength usually doesn't go away. You're just as strong. If anything, you feel more refreshed because I usually take a week off while I'm fasting. Or at least a deload where you just half-assing it in the gym with 50% volume, 50% weight. And then you go back and you realize you look better, you feel better. I mean, your blood work looks better. I've done blood work like before and after fasts. The amount of metabolic improvements that you get, substantial. Creatinine goes down, creatine phosphokinase, liver enzymes. I mean, electrolytes kind of, rebalance itself. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, but you have to do the polar opposite of what we usually talk about and just not eat and not train.
Yeah.
And nowadays people would rather take DNP and sit at home in the fan to get that same benefit of fat loss.
Yeah.
That's how crazy this fitness industry is.
I know. But you don't realize until you take a step back like that how hard you're pushing your body, and how much you can't necessarily know how much harm you're doing to yourself too. We can overcome so many things. I've seen this in my decades of training that you can overtrain or not overtrain, technically speaking, but you can train more than is optimal and still inch forward to make progress, or still recover and come back and keep doing that for years and years and years and decades. And when you take a break like that and you come back stronger, even, it's like, okay, what is going on here, right? How can this possibly be? And it makes you realize how oblivious you are to what could be had if you learn to truly auto-regulate in a way that would bring you forward as best possible. When I did that 9-day fast, I did train, and I wanted to see where my strength was because I hadn't really had a long fast, and I was doing a lot of stiff-legged deadlifts in my training at that time, and I actually did a set of 10 stiff-legged deadlifts, plates all the way to the floor with 495. Oh, sorry, 405.
Oh, wow.
405, not 494.
Yeah.
405.
Oh, 4 plates. It's
4 plates,
that's respectable.
And I was weighing 185, something like that.
Oh, man, double the body weight.
Yeah,
huh? Man. Did you get those crazy hamstring cramps and adductor cramps in the evening after that?
No, I don't cramp.
Okay.
No. But we're taking lots of minerals. Yeah. Right. But that wasn't all I said. I wasn't getting anything else. But I kept that. So doing something like that, I think, is a good check. Especially, to realize if you've been at this, like if let's say someone has been dabbling for a while and you're like, I'm using a little bit of tren and I don't sleep very well, you don't realize how awful you feel until you don't feel awful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Until you come off and then you realize that life is 10 times better now. Of course, you don't look as impressive, but you can't be on the trenbolone year round anyway. Well, some people recommend that 50 milligrams of tren year round, but I don't think it's a good idea.
Right.
What can you do? Everybody has to decide for themselves, right?
True.
Honestly, the best results I ever got was with bioidentical hormones, testosterone, growth hormone, insulin, IGF-1. And just moderate dosages of all of them. I even wrote an ebook about it, how to keep yourself healthy just using these compounds, because they're all available as pharmaceuticals. And, of course, we discussed this on the Muscle Minds, was it 1.5 years ago, about the synthetic carrier oils?
It was less than that, I think. I think it was in the last year.
Yeah, okay, maybe a year ago when we talked with Scott. Scott McNally. Right, the synthetic carrier oils, that is still an issue, although I do know that some labs have changed their formulations after I started hammering about, the dangers of ethyl oleate and propylene glycol and all those other synthetic solvents. Right, they really started changing their formulations. So now they're switching over to MCT. So that's, at least we're making a good impact.
To some degree, like this dose response that you're going to get from whatever you use is going to be a function of side effects. So I think the side effects are just telling us to what extent we have toxicity going on. So, if you look, theoretically, if you had no side effects just on what a given dose would do in terms of antigen responsiveness, it might be that you could go to 2 or 3 grams a week, or do what Chase is doing, right? And even now that he's been clean for so long, maybe his system is resilient enough to handle this overdose, I'll just call it that, of drugs. He's actually growing from it, so maybe it's not technically an overdose. Right. But he can handle the side effects and metabolize all this stuff and grow productively for it. But it's like we said before, it's not sustainable. So you're someone who's scooting along and on and off and trying to do what you can. I don't think you can do that year round. Yeah. No way. Not that you want to, do like Paul Borison style cycles either. You probably remember that guy. I think I lost you a little bit.
Paul Borison? No. Yeah. It's okay.
Oh,
continue.
Paul. You should look Paul. Yeah, Paul Borison. He actually died. He was a big on like 1,000 milligrams a day for like 2 weeks, something like that. That's how he suggested people do their cycles. It was crazy. You can only grow so fast.
That's crazy.
But back to like taking weeks off or taking time off or doing a fast, just being able to step back and say, okay, am I really, really jonesing for my next injection, just to know that I'm on track, so to speak. Like, what's going on? And it's funny, some of the best bodybuilders, the best pros that I've talked to, just hate the drug side of things. They just hate it. They can't stand it. Yeah. It seems to be a pretty common.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. That's why a lot of these guys come off for 3 months after they're Mr. Olympia, right? That they don't even go to the gym. They kind of just fully detox and just live a normal life. So at least they feel rejuvenated for the next competition season. They might miss the Arnold Classic as a result of that, because they kind of, go back to a normal shape, normal body composition. But then when they do start, they respond better, and then the resilience is up quite a bit because they took some time off.
Yeah, Ronnie. Yeah, didn't serve Ronnie in the long run. It sounds like it looks like he weathered the storm not so well, but he used to do that a good bit.
I think it's the training. I mean, it looks like all his issues are just structural from all the heavy lifting that he did. I don't think he has any organ issues.
No, I don't think so. I think I had the sense that Ronnie had some surgeries that went awry. I heard it. He's not a complainer, but I think he had some surgeons that didn't quite do the best job possible. And then he tried to do, and a lot of surgeons, everything like orthopedic surgeons, cosmetic surgeons, they don't want to go in and work on someone else's failed project. Because the surgeries generally, like, let's say you've got a hip replacement. Like, once that's kind of failed, then you have to be a wizard to try to go in and figure that out, because you don't have the same starting material. It's not like, okay, we built a house and the house fell down. Like, you can't clear the house out of the way and just build a new one. You have to build a new house on the broken house. So that's what I think may have happened with Ronnie, is that he had these surgeries, and I can't remember just heard him say a couple things in some of the interviews early on when he was starting to have problems, that he had some failed surgeries. Yeah,
some of the screws to help put his vertebrae in place, they broke as soon as he came off the operating table. Yeah, so he had some issues that way structurally, and then of course you need to heal up because you just had surgery, and then they need to remove that and put some sort of a brace around some of the spines instead of the screws. Yeah, he's been through hell and back. Same as connection issue again. Oh, no.
I know. I'm trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah. No, I think it's my end. I think it's just the Thai internet that is giving me issues. Okay. It's been raining and thunder and stuff. So otherwise, we just wrap it up and save it for part 2 because I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions in the comment section. Right, it's okay. So let's just leave it here because we have the internet connection issues going on. Hey, where can people find you? Where can they find you, Mr. Scott?
As contradictory as it may seem, Instagram seems to be the easiest way. Fortitude_training.
All right.
Or you just Google Scott Stevenson bodybuilding and it comes up pretty easily.
All right. So, you have a website, you have a forum where people can ask you questions if they bought your Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, I believe.
Yeah, I do it with the Fortitude training book, but sometimes people come and if someone sends me some good questions on Instagram or what have you, I'm like, hey, man, I'm happy to help because when I answer a question on my forum, it's for everybody that wants to read the thing. And I'm more than happy to do that. But when I answer that question on Instagram, that means it's probably the 95th time I've answered that question if I keep doing that. So I don't like to answer. I'm like, I'm just pissing in the wind. I'd rather answer them on the forum. What that does most of the time, and I hate this is the case, but most of the time it means that they just vanish. They don't. I say, I'll give you a free membership. All you got to do is sign up. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Like you get a free answer, but they don't want to take the effort to do that. So I run into that. But anyway,
they can just ask me or Victor, or ask Victor Black, and then he gets upset. I know. So this is this is the fun part. Like the questions will always be the same, and even if you make videos about them, the questions will still come.
I know.
So you can't win. Yeah. You can't win. So they can find you on your website. You have a forum. You have your Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, Instagram. What about a YouTube channel, Scott? When are you going to do your own YouTube channel?
There's the Think Big. Yeah, well, I'm sort of on Think Big with my podcast, but
I Think Big, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts. I keep on. So once you go in, you got to go all in, right? And start producing.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah, and I'm sort of enjoying the way things are going now. But I've got a big an RV that I picked up now that I can travel everywhere. I can continue the tour that I was on before the pandemic hit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I think I think I might get on there and start filming some footage because I mean, no one probably wants to see me train anymore, but actually I think probably people do. Like even with Cali Muscle, it's probably getting as many views now as did before, just because people want to see him deteriorate. What's going to happen? So with me,
they're invested. They're invested in the decline.
Could be, yeah. But but I have a hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that people would be interested in just things that I do on a day-to-day basis because I'm not that interesting to me. But I think
but you do it every day. But if many people are, you just got to put it out there and see what sticks.
I think so. You know, we'll see. Maybe YouTube's the way to make the money. I guess not that I'm in it for that.
It is.
Yeah,
trust me.
Yeah, you know.
Trust me.
All right, dude.
So do you still do coaching or only consultations?
It's just the consultations. People just need to have good questions. They have to have well-formulated questions, and we do a consultation. Some people, I hate it, but I have people that can't formulate a good question, and it saddens me. And in that case, I offer up free answers. We'll go back and forth by discussion board, and most of the times they don't want to do it because they just want me to bedazzle them with information that all of a sudden just elevates their dopamine levels in some way, shape, or form.
Dr. Scott said I can you run 5 grams of gear, so that's what I'm going to do. That's not the answer you're going to get.
Wow, I can imagine. I may have to check out Chase and see how he feels after a few months of this, because eventually that's just going to have to make him feel like.
I'll have him on the podcast next week when he gets all of his blood work.
Okay,
and I'll have him on the podcast, and I'm sure he will watch this one before we get on the call, and then he can say if he feels a little bit saddened by your comments or not.
I'm just interested because that's one of the factors too with not all but many pros is that they have the genetics to handle the side effects, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like the more you can recover from training, the more training you can do and grow from it. The more PEDs you can take without the side effects, the more you can take and more you can reap the benefits of said PEDs. So he may just be someone who's just hardy as all hell, so he can handle that for longer than someone else. So
those are usually the guys that turns pro, and I think he always still wants to turn pro. So if you can get a pro card on this cycle, or at least take a little break and then do something for contest prep, and you can get a pro card. Yeah. Then of course you'll still have to start at the bottom, like so many pros do. You get the pro card, and you realize that now you start at the bottom of the pro ranks.
Right.
and then you have to, go from 5 grams of gear to 10 grams and 18 units of growth to 36. And you're like, you know what? Never mind.
Don't even say those numbers.
Because you have to be.
That's just crazy.
I don't know, it's just doubling the dose because he got up to this level to get a pro card, and then there's another 25% of muscle mass and muscularity that's involved to compete with the bigger guys, and then most people would think that that's dose dependent, right? Related to the dose, which to a certain extent is true, but it's also another decade of effort. And some people are not willing to play that card. I mean, I'm not willing.
No,
I got other stuff to do. But that's after I realized I met Jay Cutler, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, this is way beyond me. This will never happen for me.
That's another thing that should be on that checklist before you decide to go to a show, meet some pros. And you won't get this information easily, but so many of the guys that are pros too, not all of them are using. So many of them, they turn pro using nothing, or they're natural.
No, like a couple 100 milligrams.
Yeah,
I know. I've talked with them. I've seen the blood work. It's perfect, but those are the outliers. That's not the norm.
Though. Exactly, those are the pros. So before you're thinking I'm going to become a pro, you better make sure you're an outlier, right?
Exactly. And come to the shows and meet these guys and see how driven and they interrupt you mid conversation to have a meal. Yeah. Not that they do that, but that's basically after a while they're gone and they're in the back room just eating another meal.
Yeah.
And 2 hours later they do it again. Yeah. This is what separates the big boys from the observers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The tumor on their hypothalamus driving their eating behavior is maybe part of it too. The big boys know how to eat too. If you're not a good eater, that doesn't bode well for you either. So. It's a lot of things. I know. A lot of things that people don't.
A lot of things that goes into it.
Yeah, you don't get that from the dopamine hit that you get when you're looking at Instagram.
No.
Yeah.
No. You can't social media away to the pros.
No, I know. No, you can't.
Right.
All right.
Hey, Scott, this was absolutely fantastic. Wow. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
It was enlightening. All your social media links are down below in case you guys want to follow Dr. Scott on his own social media platforms. Any last words for my audience? Any wise words?
Imagine, if you can, what a future self would say to you. Imagine who you might be, and imagine the multiplicities of yous that could be had. And think about that a long time, like for a year, before you decide to become a Sith Lord. Seriously think about it. Because I think there's too many people that vanish from social media that go unknown, that are off there in the floating away at sea. They're the corpses that we don't know about because they're
in deep space.
They're in deep space,
frozen in deep space.
They're at the bottom of the ocean or what have you.
Yeah, arm severed from the lightsabers.
Yeah, right. And don't be one of those. Don't be one of those people. Don't do that to yourself.
Stick around for the long run, guys. I
think Jordan Peterson has said something along the lines of treat yourself as if you were responsible for taking care of yourself, as if you were the person responsible for taking care of you. So what would someone who absolutely, utterly loves you do? And if you can step outside, whatever your motivations might be to do that, and look at yourself and say, this is the most loving and kind thing I can do to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Use that perspective. That'll shine a different light on it than I think many people have. So that's, I guess, my last word of quote unquote wisdom.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And until next time, Vigorous Steve out. Have a nice day, buddy.
Adios.